Lord of Mysteries, The Arrival of the New Black Emperor by author Huo Yang. Chapter 201-225. Hearing Audrey's praise, Hobert smiled slightly. I'm just giving an example with what I know. I think the Intis Republic ambassador won't be much better. Alger also seemed to see Audrey's hesitation. Whether the two countries will go to war depends only on whether the upper echelons of both sides want to fight, and has nothing to do with the life or death of a diplomat. He added, I don't know if this ambassador is a Beyonder, but many clues indicate that he most likely is. In addition, there must be many Beyonders around him, Beyonders belonging to the Intis Intelligence Agency. This department has long been influenced by the former royal family, the Sorin family, and controls some sequences of the Hunter pathway. Hearing the news provided by Emperor and the Hanged Man, the hesitation in Audrey's heart immediately disappeared. After a few seconds of contemplation, Audrey looked at the top of the long bronze table with some trepidation. Mr. the Fool, I can try to complete this mission, but I may not succeed. I'll also take on this mission. Alger explained with a smile, although I'm not in Backland, that doesn't mean I can't assassinate Bei Lang ambassador. Hobert, not wanting to show his specialness, also said, and me, but like Miss Justice, I'm not very confident. Only Derek had not been able to integrate into this topic. Klein didn't expect two sequence 7s and one sequence 8 to necessarily succeed. What reward do you hope to get? Alger and Hobert both said they would discuss it after the mission was transformed, but only Audrey blurted out, the psychologist's formula. Then she added with some hesitation, this can be discussed after the mission is completed. If it succeeds, I will bear the cost. I still owe your God-blessed a bounty. Bounty. So the Keelinger's bounty was given to Miss Justice. Klein replied in a normal tone, okay. Then, Klein began to read Rosal's diary. Audrey breathed a sigh of relief. She had finally said it. Although this would make her relatively embarrassed for a while, she would no longer have any burden in her heart. When Klein finished reading the diary, everyone's gaze turned to the Hanged Man. Alger hesitated for a moment but still said, I am being hunted by Kvechua's God Blessed. He smiled and said, fortunately, I still have Mr. the Fool's protection. Mr. the Fool, if the situation is urgent, can I ask for your help? I will pay you a reward. Klein immediately felt a chill down his spine. Even if he didn't know what God was, he knew what a genuine, God-blessed, represented. His evil god was just an empty shell. At most, he could only accept sacrifices and grant boons now. He thought to himself, why don't you try sacrificing the God to me? In that case, the one holding the tarot club in the future might be the God. However, he couldn't show weakness at this time. Klein said, you can. However, the decision of whether to help or not depends on Mr. the Fool. After getting Mr. the Fool's reply, Alger continued to narrate, after returning to the sea from Backland, I continued my previous exploration and arrived at the first location marked by the elf ruins. That location is northwest of Blue Mountain Island. There's a small island nearby called Embed Island. I rested there for a night, and then began exploring the first location. That morning, taking advantage of the calm sea, I found an excuse to anchor in the designated sea area and dived underwater while the crew were resting. As soon as I entered the water, I found many sea monsters roaming in this sea area. You might not know what this means, but in a sea area where a certain sea monster often roams, ships often go missing. The strange thing is, with so many sea monsters in the same sea area, there were no rumors of missing ships near Embed Island. Alger paused and glanced at Emperor. In fact, Alger probably guessed that these sea monsters might have been attracted by that high sequence, extraordinary characteristic, but he lacked enough advanced Beyonder knowledge and dared not confirm his speculation. Hobert saw Alger's gaze, but he had no intention of answering now, and then I carefully used one of my magical items to avoid those sea monsters. Alger continued, when I continued to dive, I saw light at the bottom of the water. After I carefully observed and confirmed that those lights were my destination, I continued forward and quickly arrived in front of a structure that looked like a giant bubble. There was actually a dry space at the bottom of the sea. And what was emitting light was a kind of coral I had never seen before. Audrey listened intently. She had always hoped for such an experience of exploring unknown sea areas or regions. Following the hanged man's narration, she also fantasized about herself exploring the seabed with Susie. Wait, why take Susie? Derek listened carefully to the hanged man's description of the ocean. He had only seen descriptions of the ocean in textbooks, and they were very concise. Hobert also listened very carefully. For him, this was a brand new experience under his guidance. Alger's narration continued. I entered that area. There was oxygen inside, and the air was very fresh. In the dim light, I saw a grand hall with a greatly different architectural style from the current north-south continent, and the architectural style of the hall was very similar to the elf architecture depicted in the previous murals. After slowly approaching the hall, I actually found people living inside. Their clothing looked very much like that of clergymen. I observed for a while and felt that secretly infiltrating the hall carried great risk, so I circled the hall and found some collapsed ruins and debris, and found some patterns in the ruins. Mr. the Fool, can you help me materialize those patterns? After getting the Fool's approval, Alger materialized the patterns he had seen. Hobert immediately recognized that those patterns were somewhat similar to Teodi patterns. He estimated that Mr. the Fool, as a keyboard warrior, wouldn't recognize this, because it was rare in life before the transmigration. Hobert only came into contact with these patterns because of his work in the Ad era, otherwise he wouldn't have known either. The appearance of the Teodi pattern is a majestic beast face outlined with ancient and elegant lines, also known as a beast mask pattern. Or it was a pattern somewhat resembling a bird's face and a gecko's body. In fact, it should be a human face with a sheep's body, but the way it was outlined with lines made it look very much like a bird's face with a beast's body. The patterns provided by Alger were clearly, magically modified, but the essence of the beast mask pattern, or Teodi pattern, was still there. Hobert said, these patterns also conform to the cultural characteristics of the elf. It is said to depict an ancient ferocious beast that was extremely gluttonous. This pattern is often seen in sacrificial occasions or carved on ritual vessels. Alger frowned tightly. I thought this would represent the image of the sea god, because the clothes of the sea gods, God blessed, are embroidered with similar patterns. Hearing Hobert's description, Alger guessed, could it be that a Beander of sea god borrowed the elf's symbol? Or is it? Alger suddenly had a bold guess, but because it was somewhat blasphemous to the gods, and because he was in front of the Fool, he didn't know how to voice it for a moment. Hobert already roughly understood what was going on. He said, you continue. We'll discuss this matter later. Alger nodded and continued, at that time, I was preparing to first gather some intelligence before proceeding with further exploration. But after I left that sea area, I found that I seemed to have been targeted by the sea gods, believers. Previously, I had encountered some sea gods, believers. Although what they did was somewhat crazy, as long as I didn't provoke them, they were willing to engage in some exchanges and transactions with me. I had no actions that provoked them, but the sea god believers on Embed Island all cast hostile glances at me. I realized something was wrong and immediately left. Soon, a Beander of sea god caught up. No matter what methods I used to evade, they always managed to find me. I dealt with them for 2 days and 2 nights before finding an opportunity to get rid of them. But I'm sure that new Beyonders will catch up soon. So I'm asking for help from everyone in the Tarot Club. How should I solve the current problem? Audrey raised her hand. Mr. Hanged Man, I want to ask a question first. What kind of god is the sea god? Why have I never heard of him? The sea god is a deity worshipped on some colonial islands, Alger explained. It is said that he is temperamental and enjoys blood sacrifices. Some believers who pray for the calming of winds and waves will receive an accurate response from the sea god. Others who pray for the sea god to calm the winds and waves find that the sea god makes the winds and waves even stronger. I have heard more than once that the sea god's believers pleased their god with blood sacrifices, allowing them to obtain many runes of the storm domain. Of course, sometimes it also turns all believers participating in the sacrifice into monsters. Audrey was somewhat surprised. There's a god like that. This should be. She was about to say that this should be an evil god, but then she thought that Mr. the Fool was not a traditional deity either, and such existences were also called evil gods in Orthodox churches. So she stopped halfway through her sentence. Just as Audrey was hesitating whether to apologize to Mr. the Fool, Hobert suddenly spoke, diffusing the awkwardness. Comparing Mr. the Fool with such a wild god is disrespectful to Mr. the Fool. Audrey then naturally apologized to Mr. the Fool. Sorry, Mr. the Fool, I shouldn't have said that. At the same time, she was grateful to Mr. Emperor for helping her out. Klein smiled slightly and made no response, as if it was something unworthy of his attention. Outwardly, he was calm, but inwardly, he felt a little guilty, because he didn't even know what kind of god the sea god truly was. He was really a little afraid that the hanged man, or justice, would ask him for information about the sea god. With Emperor's words, Klein felt a little relieved. It didn't matter if he couldn't answer. After all, the sea god's level was too low. Thinking of this, Klein felt even more guilty. Hobert smiled. Let's first solve the problem facing Mr. Hanged Man. Alger asked, what reward do you hope to receive? I believe that as a member of the Tarot Club, helping other members solve difficulties does not require any reward. Hobert continued, I have roughly understood what happened to you, and I can try to help you solve the difficulty, but if you need me to provide an explanation, you will need to pay me some reward, as it involves some advanced knowledge. Alger nodded. Thank you for your generosity. Hobert asked, did you bring anything out of the ruins? I brought out a small section of glowing coral, as well as a piece of jade carved with elf patterns from the ruins, Alger said. However, when I realized that the sea gods beyonders seemed to know my whereabouts, I threw all of these things into the sea. Hobert asked again, did anything suddenly appear on your ship? Or did any crew members suddenly become abnormal? I checked carefully and didn't find any such situation. As an old hand at sea, Alger still had that level of vigilance. After ruling out these possibilities, there was only one place left. Hobert asked again, have you checked the bottom of the ship? I haven't checked, Alger said. After the gathering, I will immediately go check the bottom of the ship. This wasn't because Alger wasn't careful enough, but rather it was a blind spot, or a loophole, that people who spent more time at sea were more likely to overlook. Hobert was now particularly good at finding such loopholes. He said, driving creatures at the bottom of the sea to serve oneself is one of the sea god's abilities. If the problem really is at the bottom of the ship, it shouldn't be too difficult to find. If the problem isn't at the bottom of the ship, you can pray to the Fool, and I'll help you think of other possibilities. The more Alger thought about it, the more he felt the problem should be at the bottom of the ship. Thank you for your help. Hobert smiled. As for why you encountered such a situation, let me ask you a few questions. Are the believers of sea god Kvetua only found in certain sea areas? Alger was stunned, then nodded. Yes. Are there some elf patterns or cultural elements circulating among the sea god's believers? Alger thought back for a moment. Yes. Are you guessing that the sea god is actually a surviving powerful elf? But you don't understand how he possesses some abilities that only deities have. Alger trembled all over. Yes. Wait. Audrey suddenly said, Mr. Emperor, are you saying that the sea god is an ordinary person? No, I mean a Beander in disguise. Or an elf in disguise. Such a thought was too blasphemous to the gods. Klein, behind the gray fog, finally understood. No wonder, Emperor called the sea god a wild god. It turned out he was just a high sequence Beander. This is the content that requires payment, Hobert said. Everyone, do you want to know the principles behind this? I really want to. Audrey clenched her fists, but she would be in a very tight financial situation soon, and she wasn't sure if she could afford the information fee. Derek, who had been silent, also showed enough interest. Alger simply asked, what reward do you want? The three questions from Emperor just now had piqued all his curiosity. If the reward wasn't too high, he would be very happy to get the answer. £800. Hobert said, when the transaction is complete, you will find it absolutely worth the price. Alger nodded, still within an acceptable range. He was about to initiate the transaction when he heard Hobert say, you all seem to want to know. How about this, as members of the Tarot Club, I'll give you a discount. If only one person wants to know the answer, they need to pay me £800. If two people want to know the answer, they only need to pay me £500 each. If all three of you want to trade with me, each person only needs to pay me £400. Klein, behind the gray fog, suppressed the urge to cover his face. Are you treating this place like Pinduoduo? How are you even doing group buys now? As the daughter of a banker, Audrey immediately realized that Emperor's method of transaction, which seemingly made the buyer profit, actually benefited both the seller and the buyer. She couldn't help but exclaim in her heart, Emperor is truly a business genius. £800 transaction was turned into £1,200. Alger was happy to accept, since he could save half the money. Only Derek said, Mr. Emperor, but what should I do if I don't have your gold pounds? You can pay with extraordinary materials. Hobert had already thought for him, I'll give you a rough conversion. A main material for sequence 8 is worth about £300. You can ask Mr. the Fool or Mr. Hanged Man. The price I'm offering is low. Although there will be a premium, there's also a certain probability it won't sell for £300. So we'll trade at the low price. The value of the materials you provide should preferably be a little higher than £400, because I still need to find a channel to sell them. No need to ask, Derek said, Mr. Emperor, I trust you. Hobert sighed, little son is still too young. This reminded Hobert of his university days, where even after being hurt by society and people, he always had full trust in those around him. Amidst his swirling thoughts, Hobert asked, are you all trading with me? Audrey said, yes. As long as she saved a bit, coming up with £400 wasn't very difficult. Alger and Derek also nodded one after another. Hobert said, okay, Mr. Hanged Man, you now owe me £1,400. Miss Justice and Mr. Sun can pay me a few days later. Alger nodded, I also need a few days to pay you. With Mr. the Fool as a witness, I won't default. He didn't have that much cash on hand and needed to process some items on the island before he could clear his debt. Hobert nodded, no problem. Then, with Mr. the Fool as a witness, the transaction begins. He said, Mr. Hanged Man's guess was correct. The grand hall he saw at the bottom of the sea is indeed the temple of the sea god Quechua. And Quechua is not an elf survivor. I made this judgment based on two clues. The first clue is Mr. Hanged Man's discovery in the previous ruins. The mixed blood in the ruins described it very clearly at the time. The three locations he marked were all places where powerful individuals fell. They must have sent people to search those three locations more than once. If there were any elf powerhouses still alive, they would have certainly gone to seek refuge with this powerhouse. The second clue is that after the sea god began to have believers, the Storm Church should have started paying attention to him. If he were an elf remnant, then the sea god must have existed for over 1,000 years at least. It's impossible for the Storm Church not to have located the sea god in such a long time, so the sea god's believers must have appeared only in the last 100 or 200 years, or even a shorter period. Based on the above clues, I made this guess. Alger nodded, indeed, the belief in the sea god only appeared in recent decades. Hobert continued, so I speculate that the sea god should be a certain person, or even a certain sea monster, who devoured the high-level extraordinary characteristic left by the elf. Sea monster? Alger asked in surprise. Klein, who was freeloading behind the gray fog, felt that this was indeed possible. If it were a sea monster that already had the sailor pathway extraordinary characteristic within its body, then its massive size could very likely dilute the burden of the extraordinary characteristic, and there would be a very small chance that it could successfully take the potion across sequence levels and become a high sequence in one fell swoop. Audrey was already having trouble keeping up with Hobert's thoughts and could only listen carefully for now, planning to ponder it after the transaction was complete. Derek also found Hobert's statement very novel, and he wondered, I wonder if the monsters we encounter during patrols can advance by devouring other monsters. Alger's Beyonder knowledge was also sufficient for him to understand this point. It was just that he was a bit surprised when he first heard Hobert say it, but then he quickly accepted Hobert's speculation. That's right, it's a sea monster, Hobert said. It is precisely because the sea god is a sea monster that he is bloodthirsty and so fond of blood sacrifices. Another reason supporting my speculation is that if a human successfully advanced to sequence 3, the most likely scenario is that there would now be 5 kings on the sea. He would never wait in a certain place for people from the Storm Church to find him. From this, I can also speculate that the sea god's condition is not very good. When he devoured that extraordinary characteristic, there must have been no ritual assistance. That's why the sea god's believers are so fanatical, because their god is in a semi-mad state. The sea god himself might even be unable to leave that elf ruin. Alger nodded, feeling that Emperor's guess should be very accurate. Audrey and Derek, on the other hand, admired Emperor for guessing so much from limited clues after hearing Hanged Man's description. Kay also couldn't help but exclaim, Emperor's analysis is well-reasoned and logical, as if he knows the answer to the problem. Kay was right this time. Hobert certainly knew the answer to this problem. It was like solving a math problem where you know both the conditions and the answer, you just need to write out the calculation process. Another important piece of information is that, to my knowledge, after becoming a sequence 3, one can design an honorific name pointing to oneself. Hobert continued, however, a sequence 3 can only respond to believers' prayers within a certain range. Common sequence 3 honorific names often include a segment like, so-and-so of so-and-so, such as, the fool's attendant, or, the fool's favored. Because the sea god is not a saint of a certain church, there might not be a segment with such a structure, but there will definitely be a description related to a region, such as something of Backland, or something of a certain sea area. Alger immediately understood why Emperor could guess that the sea god's followers were only within a certain range, because the sea god could only respond to prayers within a certain range. At the same time, he recalled some honorific names he had heard, which were consistent with Emperor's description. Some honorific names circulated in the church had segments like, something of Storm of Lord. And one of the sea god Kvechua's honorific names was, Protector of the Rosted Archipelago. Then Alger became somewhat excited, imagining himself becoming a sequence 3 and being able to design his own honorific name and respond to his believers. Audrey, on the other hand, sighed that the £400 were truly worth it, having heard such high-level knowledge. Derek, however, felt a little sad. Silver City has no sequence 3, so we don't know this knowledge, or there might be corresponding descriptions in some ancient books in the library, but they have long been forgotten by us. Finally, Hobert smiled, everyone, this is the sea god. There's one more chapter. Hobert continued, there should still be a large number of things with elf cultural characteristics left in the ruins. These things were spread by the sea god's priests and became symbols of the sea god's followers. He spread his hands, everything makes sense now. Audrey said, Emperor, although it's rude to say so, I really want to applaud you. This is the best deduction I've ever heard. Hobert gentlemanly said, thank you, your praise is the best applause. Alger also said, as you said, it's worth more than its price. Derek nodded, expressing agreement with the Hanged Man's statement. Hobert smiled and said, I always value credit. After this transaction ended, Audrey, still feeling unfulfilled, initiated another transaction with Derek regarding the information about the Dream Dragon. Originally, Audrey wanted to trade with Emperor, as Emperor's knowledge might be more comprehensive, but the price would also be more expensive. Audrey, who had never worried about money, began to be meticulous in her calculations, feeling that she could first get a general idea from the sun, for now, and for some unclear parts, she could ask Emperor when she had more money. And Derek hoped to obtain the Sequence 8 potion formula for the singer. So Klein initiated a three-party transaction, where he would first pay Derek's remuneration, providing the Light Seeker potion formula, and Audrey's remuneration would in turn be paid to the Fool. As for what the remuneration would be, Klein only said, "There's no need to rush this. Perhaps my dear S will need help with something later." Hobert, sitting below, immediately complained in his heart, "Shameless. How dare he use S? Your only dear is yourself. Speaking of which, I at least have 2 believers, and I wouldn't even dare to say that." Then Derek began to describe the dragons in their textbooks, and he mentioned Angerwade, the king of dragons, and his son, Arlisu Horde, the nightmare dragon. This immediately reminded Audrey and Klein of Emperor's previous description of 008. This sealed artifact was the extraordinary characteristic that condensed after Arlisu Horde's death. They seemed to have a comprehensive understanding of the figures of ancient times. So, at Audrey's request, Mr. the Fool lifted the sensory blockade on Hobert. Audrey asked Hobert, "Emperor, is Angerwade, the king of dragons, one of the 8 ancient gods you mentioned before?" Hobert nodded, "Yes." Audrey asked again, "Are all these ancient gods the leaders of races like dragons and giants?" Hobert only gave simple true or false answers. He nodded and said somewhat vaguely, "You could say that. In fact, human-like extraordinary creatures such as giants and elf were all variations of humans." "Thank you for your answer," Audrey said. "This gives me a systematic understanding of a part of ancient history." Hobert smiled and said nothing. After a few more casual chats, Klein announced the end of this Tarot Club meeting. In the safe shipping lane of the raging sea, Alger recalled the exchange at the Tarot Club. He immediately stood up and pulled open the door to the captain's cabin, preparing to immediately dive under the ship to take a look. As soon as he opened the door, he saw 2 sailors waiting outside for him. One of the sailors said, "Captain, another ship is catching up." They had knocked hard on the door earlier but received no response, because this was a ghost ship, and without the captain's permission, the sailors simply couldn't open the captain's cabin door. Even if they rammed the door, the cabin door would be very difficult to open. "I know," Alger said casually with a grim face, "I slept for a while just now." He now had 2 choices. One was to report the location of the sea god's temple to the church. As long as the church eliminated the sea god, Alger would definitely receive generous rewards. The second option was to conceal it and, after he became a demigod, replace the sea god. Ultimately, Alger chose the second option. At worst, he wouldn't trade with the sea god's followers anymore, but an extraordinary characteristic of Sequence 3 was not that easy to encounter. Having understood this, Alger's steps became more forceful. When he came to replace the sea god, it also meant that there would be another king on the sea. Alger came to the deck, took a steel harpoon used for dealing with sea monsters, and then dived into the water, searching along the bottom of the ship. The bottom of the ship looked ancient and dilapidated, covered in barnacles. Alger sighed, "It's time to find a shipyard to clean up these annoying things again." He searched all the way to the stern of the ship when Alger saw a colorful chitin attached to the bottom of the ship. "This is it." Chitins are called chitins because their shape resembles stones, not because they always move in rocky areas. Unlike ordinary chitins, the colorful chitin has a much larger body size than ordinary chitins. Its single eye and scales are relatively common extraordinary materials. The chitin in front of Alger was as long as a forearm, with a regular oval shape, and its single eye had 4 colors: black, gray, green, and blue. At this moment, the colorful chitin's single eye also saw Alger, and some of its shell plates stood up and shot towards Alger. Alger manipulated the water flow, changing the trajectory of those shell plates, causing them to hit elsewhere. Then Alger used the steel harpoon to pry the chitin off the bottom of the ship. The chitin immediately flapped its scales and quickly fled, but it was too late. Alger was more agile underwater than on land. A layer of magical scales appeared on his body, making him faster than fish underwater. Seizing the opportunity, Alger used the harpoon to stab the colorful chitin through its softest underbelly, piercing it clean through. Then Alger quickly swam towards the surface, and at the same time, the seawater seemed to have a life of its own, trying to lift Alger. The moment he broke the surface, Alger leapt up, jumping onto the ship like a flying fish. Alger held up the colorful chitin, which was still trying to wiggle its scales. "This is the mark the pursuers secretly placed on our ship." As he spoke, he threw the colorful chitin onto the deck, stepped on it with his foot, and used one hand to gouge out its colorful eyeball. The entire colorful chitin twitched a few times, then became motionless. "As long as we deal with the pursuers behind us, we'll be safe," Alger said. "To Leak Island." The sailors grinned wickedly. "Aye, Captain." Leak Island was an uninhabited island they had accidentally discovered. There was a steep mountain on the island with many fruit trees, which could replenish the fruits needed during the voyage. In addition, the island's mountain blocked several large whirlpools behind the island. By the time they rounded the island and saw those whirlpools, it was too late to turn the rudder. And the Blue Avenger was a ghost ship that could flexibly shuttle between whirlpools according to the captain's will. Alger and the others had already used this advantage to bury 3 groups of enemies at Leak Island. After the sailors went to work, Alger processed the colorful chitin's scales with a dagger while lamenting in his heart. This was the only gain from this exploration. These materials combined would only sell for £200. The consequence, however, was that he could no longer interact with the sea god's followers, and he had to constantly guard against their pursuit. Then Alger realized that many times, exploration might not achieve one's desired goals, and perhaps this was the true meaning of being a navigator. He immediately felt the digestion of the potion, which made Alger realize again that his thoughts just now were one of the important rules for role-playing a navigator. In Backland, Queen's District, inside Count Hall's luxurious villa, Audrey sat on a soft stool, considering how to complete the fool's commission. She quickly thought of 2 avenues. One was to ask Zio and Furs to commission Mr. A, whom she had met before. Although Mr. A's gaze was annoying, he should be a very powerful Beander. The other avenue was to commission Hobert. Of course, with Hobert's strength, he probably couldn't complete the assassination commission, but he was General Christine's eldest son, and he had extensive connections in Backland's Beander world. He should have certain channels to recommission the task, at most paying some intermediary fees. After a brief hesitation, Audrey decided to go through Zio and Furs first. Just as she was about to write to the 2 ladies, she thought of a crucial question. She knew very little about Bei Lang, ambassador of Intis. In this situation, it would be easy to misjudge the difficulty of the task and thus commission it to an unsuitable person. After a moment of contemplation, Audrey turned to her maid Anne and said, "I accept Countess Guria's invitation and will attend her ball on time tonight." Guria was Count Wolf's wife, and her upcoming ball had invited ambassadors from various countries stationed in Rouen, including Bei Lang, ambassador of Intis. Audrey had originally declined the invitation, but out of politeness, she would only inform the host of the ball a few hours before it began that she couldn't make it due to other commitments. As per custom, the servants had not yet informed Countess Wolf of this news. Audrey decided to observe Bei Lang ambassador first, gather enough intelligence, and then meet with Zio and Furs. 15 Minsk Street. Klein, who had returned to the real world from Source Castle, opened the curtains and sat at his desk, contemplating his current situation. First, from the intelligence provided by Emperor last week, as well as this week's diary, he confirmed that the secret order had close cooperation with the Intis Republic, and he understood that the iron-black linear worm that had snuck into his room last night to check the information he left on his desk was the work of a diviner sequence Beander. The mission to assassinate the ambassador had also been commissioned, but he didn't know if it would succeed. In any case, he had done everything possible to deal with it. Whether he could overcome this crisis could only be left to fate. Klein looked at the finally dissipated fog outside the window and decided to go to Brave Bar again tonight to see if he could meet other Beyonders, laying the groundwork for choosing a bodyguard. After making up his mind, Klein read the newspaper while waiting for the sky to darken. God-forsaken land, Silver City. Derek returned to his dimly lit room and stared blankly at the lightning in the sky outside. He tried hard to imagine what the sea looked like, and he tried hard to imagine the feeling of swimming in the sea. As he thought, a sense of sorrow reappeared in his heart. If he didn't know about the outside world, he wouldn't be so sad, but the problem was, he knew, yet he couldn't touch it. My Lord, please cast down your light and guide your devout believers. Derek's praise immediately filled the room with light, and he also seemed to gain courage from the light. With the fool's guidance, and with the help of Emperor and the others, I am already closer to hope than the other people in Silver City. So he tidied his clothes and prepared to go to the training ground first to train, striving to pass the instructor's assessment. As long as he passed the assessment, he could be assigned to the patrol team. As long as he started serving Silver City, he could earn merit and use it to exchange for extraordinary materials to repay Emperor's debt. After training, he also planned to go to the library to find more descriptions about Sequence 3 Saints. Derek tried to smile. Ha ha ha, life is full of hope again. 192 Blanca Street, Backland. Hobert returned to his room. The weather today was not very good, it seemed like it was going to rain. Hobert put on an extra layer of clothing and prepared to work at the office until closing time. Over the past few days, their team's work had gradually gotten on track, and there were no longer any backlog of letters. With continuous publicity in the newspapers, people came to commission them every day, but most of the people who came here were workers or farmers, and some consumers who wanted to seek justice. Hobert's place seemed even livelier than the trade unions and consumer associations. Arnold did not allow the reporters who were invited to observe at the time to smear Hobert and Bob, because more and more nobles were annoyed by his actions, which made him dare not express any opinion on the matter. As a result, the media's reports on Hobert's victory were all praises, which truly made Hobert a famous lawyer. This week, Hobert's team would have 8 cases go to court successively. Jessica and the others had just taken on this type of case and might not be very skilled yet. At first, Hobert needed to appear in court with them and help them design defense strategies. Hobert, walking on the foggy street, sighed, "It's going to be another busy week." As soon as he arrived at the office, Jessica told Hobert that he had 2 personal letters. Hobert had Jessica sit across from him and first discuss the details of tomorrow's court session with her. Finally, he hinted meaningfully, "Your eloquence is already very good, there's no need to use other abilities. You should know that many judges are true judges." Jessica paused slightly, then smiled, "Thank you for the reminder." After Jessica left, Hobert went to read the 2 letters from Tingen City. They were Elizabeth's reply and Serena's letter. Hobert first opened Elizabeth's letter. The little girl first thanked Hobert for his concern, then congratulated Hobert on his success, and then mentioned the death of her good friend Melissa's relative, which was a blow to Melissa. Finally, Elizabeth said she was very sorry for revealing Hobert's address to Serena, because Serena had asked her many times, almost following her around asking. Opening Serena's letter, every line was filled with admiration for Hobert and envy for Hobert's extensive knowledge. She had written 3 full pages of letter paper. Hobert sighed, "Why only 3 pages?" Then he exclaimed, "Compared to Elliot, Serena has more potential to be a fanatical believer." At the end of this letter, Serena finally expressed her hope to ask Hobert to be her mentor in mysticism. Hobert thought that he would play the role of chaos mentor in the future, and now he could take an apprentice first to prepare for his future role-playing. Opening his fountain pen, Hobert first replied to Elizabeth, greeting her parents, then stating that he would reply to Serena, and finally Hobert invited Elizabeth to bring Melissa to Backland for a change of scenery. Then he replied to Serena, not immediately agreeing to be her mentor, only saying that he could answer some of her questions about mysticism, and warning her not to have any contact with any friends of her previous mentor. He handed the replies to Jessica and asked her to help mail them. After work, Hobert thought that Furs was going to attend an author's salon tonight and wouldn't be home, and Zio was busy tracking Raft and also wouldn't be eating at home, so he happily decided to go to a restaurant for a good meal. As soon as he sat down in the restaurant, Hobert saw Mr. Azek, a middle-aged man with bronze skin and soft features, dining at a nearby table. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. The encounter with Azek was something Hobert had not anticipated at all. If he hadn't known that Mr. Azek was a descendant of the death god, he would have suspected Azek was an angel of the lawyer pathway. Hobert smiled and greeted him. "Sir, I didn't expect to meet you here." Azek politely stood up and said, "Congratulations, young man, it seems you have found the true essence of your abilities." Hobert was slightly startled, then immediately understood. The first time he met Mr. Azek in the cemetery, he had just consumed the potion, and now, more than half of the potion on him had been digested. Azek had seen through his state almost at a glance. Hobert smiled faintly. "I thought you were going to congratulate me on winning a crucial case for my career." He asked knowingly, "Are you dining alone?" "Yes. May I join your table?" Hobert smiled. "My companions are all busy and can't join me for dinner, and dining alone is too boring." He didn't actually have such quirks, he was just looking for an excuse to share a table with Mr. Azek. This was an angel walking on earth, but his state was not right. He himself didn't even know he was an angel. At the same time, he was Kay's main backer. Since Kay could rely on him, why couldn't Hobert? Azek did not refuse Hobert's request. So the two of them chatted idly, truly just idle chatter. Hobert talked about his work. Azek was a little surprised. "You are Hobert." Hobert often appeared in recent newspapers, and Azek had also seen his name. The two of them followed this topic and talked about the workers in Backland, and about the East District of Backland. After the meal, they both felt a bit reluctant to part. But Hobert did not ask for Azek's contact information. He knew that the process of approaching Azek should not be too hasty. The conversation today was just right. On the way back, Hobert also marveled at the wonder of fate. Back at home, Zio had just returned as well. She drank tea and sighed. "Hobert, today I have a whole new understanding of someone's level of bad luck." Raft was truly miserable. He fell down the stairs and knocked out a front tooth. In the casino, he got into an argument with someone, and because he was too agitated, he stepped on a card that had fallen on the floor, and it said he fractured his tailbone. Zio shook her head. "I almost feel sorry for this guy. Is he really as dangerous as the masked man said?" Furz's voice suddenly came from the dining room. "Perhaps these behaviors are just him pretending to deceive you." Hobert and Zio were startled. They turned their heads and saw Furz picking up a teacup to pour some tea. Hobert asked, When did you come back?" "Just now." Furz didn't understand why their faces looked so bad. Zio then asked, "Why didn't you use the door?" "Why should I use the door? Going directly to the kitchen saves me a lot of walking." Hobert and Zio were speechless. At Countess Wolf's ball in the Queen's District, Backland. Through observation, Audrey knew that Bei K Lang was an old lecher. His eye contact and physical interactions with several ladies were all inappropriate. To confirm her suspicions, Audrey also chatted with Bei K Lang for a few moments, and heard his explicit compliments to her, and saw his annoying gaze. Just as Audrey got rid of Bei K Lang, Kong Si, who was also attending the ball, came over and whispered, "Audrey, don't be fooled by that Bei K Lang ambassador. He's an old pervert. I don't know how many ladies he's tricked into bed." Kong Si was the youngest son of Viscount Learson, and had a good relationship with both Audrey and Berlint. "Kong Si, do you have some misunderstanding about me?" Audrey tried to maintain her elegance. "Goddess, how could I be fooled by that Bei K Lang ambassador? The perfume he sprays irritates me to the point of wanting to vomit. His words are so dirty, and his taste is like a male peacock." "Your feeling is not wrong." Kong Si showed a genuine smile and said in an even lower voice, "Moreover, Bei K Lang is a very dangerous fellow." "How dangerous?" Audrey cooperatively asked back with curiosity. Kong Si said with a serious expression, "He is Intis's intelligence chief in the kingdom, and has done many bad things, but we have never obtained useful evidence. He himself is a sequence 6 feet schemer. He did not have too many reservations about Audrey, and also knew that Audrey understood some mysticism knowledge, so he directly told her that Bei K Lang was a sequence 6, as well as Bei K Lang's sequence 5 assistant. He also told Audrey that Bei K Lang was very good at planning conspiracies and other information, which greatly benefited Audrey. While the two were chatting, Audrey saw the softly spoken Ambassador Tim. She asked Kong Si, I heard from a friend that Ambassador Tim once sponsored a cult organization in South Wales County. Kong Si was startled. Yes, these ambassadors are actually all undermining the harmony of the ruined kingdom. He asked, we all know about this, but we haven't found any evidence. Can your friend provide evidence? As for Audrey's source of information, Kong Si did not intend to inquire in detail. After all, Count Hall was a count who had achievements in politics and was well informed. I'm sorry, he also heard it from others. Audrey asked again. He also said that those cult organizations have been eliminated, right? Yes, as far as I know, a mercenary club team destroyed the cult's headquarters and rescued 5 infants who were about to be sacrificed. It's a good thing they were eliminated. Which mercenary club team carried out this righteous action? The Iron Thorns team. They received the mission from the mercenary club. Audrey recalled that the Emperor had previously left the address of the mercenary club, and the information matched. She thought to herself, Mr. Emperor, I am about to find you, but you have no clue about Miss Justice, do you? On Blanca Street, Hobert, who was sound asleep, suddenly sneezed, which woke him up. It took him a long time to fall back asleep. The next morning, while Hobert was having breakfast with Zio and Furs, Audrey's maid delivered a letter. Audrey invited Zio and Furs to meet at Viscount Glaine's mansion. Furs was a little surprised. Didn't we just attend the Beander gathering at the medical school? Why are they looking for us again? Hobert, of course, knew that they were being asked to commission Mr. A to assassinate Bei K Lang. Perhaps there's something else. Today, he had to accompany Jessica to court at 8:30, and then accompany Lasga to court at 10 o'clock. In the afternoon, he also wanted to visit Mr. Dicko's at 1899 Nicro Street. His day was packed. After breakfast, Hobert left in a hurry. On the other side, Zio and Furs received Audrey's commission at Viscount Glaine's mansion, and contacted Mr. A through their channels. However, Mr. A did not appear directly. Instead, his attendant asked in the reception room, what can I do for you two? Furs said, we want to speak with Mr. A directly. I apologize, Mr. A is not seeing anyone at the moment. Although the attendant said, apology, he showed no remorse at all. Telling me is the same, I will immediately convey it to Mr. A. Zio said, we have brought a big deal, the assassination of Bei K Lang Jean Martin, the Intis ambassador to the kingdom. The attendant was slightly startled. Please wait a moment, I will convey it immediately. He quickly walked into a dimly lit room nearby, where a seemingly collapsed mass of flesh emitted Mr. A's voice. What do they want? They want to hire you to assassinate the Intis ambassador, Bei K Lang. That collapsing mass of flesh, like liquid, formed a human shape, its appearance vaguely resembling Mr. A. Damn night watchers, they made me miss a big deal. This was a perfect opportunity to promote my lord's prestige. In the carriage, Hugh said, it's hard to imagine that Mr. A would refuse this commission. She frowned and said, but among the Beyonders we know, it seems only Mr. A has the strength to complete this commission. We should quickly tell Miss Audrey this news. Furs said, to this day, I still can't believe Miss Audrey would issue such a task. Hugh said, it seems Miss Audrey is not as naive as she appears. Could this be a secret struggle within the aristocracy? Or a prelude to instigating war? Furs also speculated, it could also be that some important figures, represented by Count Hall, hope the situation becomes chaos. The two looked at each other, finding it a bit funny. How could two small figures like them guess the thoughts of these important figures? Returning to Viscount Roulin's mansion by carriage, Audrey, who was waiting for news, immediately felt a sense of frustration when she heard that Mr. A had refused the commission. But soon, she made up her mind. I want to initiate an emergency meeting of the Justice League. Hugh, Furs, and Brulint looked at each other. There were already 4 initiators here, only Hobert, the initiator, was absent. Hobert was busy all morning, winning both lawsuits, which was a good start for their team. During lunch, Hobert reviewed the recent defense with Jessica and Lasga, pointing out several mistakes they made during the defense. The newcomer Jessica listened and took notes, even forgetting to eat. Lasga also listened very carefully and was glad he made the right choice to follow Hobert to the new team. For him, this was a good opportunity to gain experience and work experience. Especially Hobert's method of reviewing cases with them was a learning opportunity rarely encountered when working as an assistant for other lawyers. After lunch, Hobert asked Jessica and the other person to go back first. He was going to visit a client. Following the address given by Harvey Hayden, Hobert arrived at 1899 Nicro Street. As soon as he got out of the carriage, he seemed to sense something and looked at an exquisite and spacious private carriage. The window was open, and he saw an old man and a middle-aged man sitting opposite each other inside. The middle-aged man had long hair and looked a bit greasy. He was precisely the person in charge of the Tamara family in Backland, whom Hobert had seen when communing with members of the Tamara family previously. In front of the old man, the middle-aged man looked somewhat obsequious, not even smoking a cigar. So much time had passed since the battle that Hobert was no longer afraid of seeing people from the Tamara family. He remembered the old man's appearance, then went to look at the sign of No. 1899, Rui Machinery Company. At this moment, the old man and the long-haired Alva in the carriage also seemed to sense something and looked at Hobert. At this time, Hobert was already looking at the sign of Rui Machinery Company, so he did not attract their attention. The two did not pay attention and continued on their way. This old man was one of the people sent by the Tamara family to investigate why the team sent to clear out traitors was annihilated. He was responsible for the overt investigation, but after more than 10 days, he found no results and could only accept Alva's explanation in the report. The action team was eliminated by the Rune royal family. Today was the old man's departure day, and Alva planned to personally escort him to the train station. On the other side, Hobert calmly entered the company's hall and asked the front desk to see Mr. Dickos, requesting the front desk to inform him that he was Hobert Jeffrey. He was already accustomed to the country of disorders, attraction to beyonders of the same sequence. Other beyonders could not yet feel their association with the country of disorder, which was why he was so calm. The front desk was about to refuse Hobert's request, but hearing Hobert introduce himself, she realized he might be a friend of Mr. Dickos. So, she asked Hobert to wait on the sofa while she went upstairs to inform him. However, she was gone for half an hour. Half an hour later, the young girl returned somewhat breathlessly. Mr. Dickos asks you to meet him at the steam pump factory. Hobert followed the young girl and saw the vast factory district behind the company. From the company's hall, Hobert could tell that Dickos's business was very large, but he hadn't expected it to be this large. These factories were all workshops producing large machinery, such as steam cranes, steam textile machines, steam sugar presses, steam mining machines, steam machine tools, and even steam locomotives. It took more than 10 minutes of walking to reach the steam pump workshop. Entering through the small door of the workshop, Hobert saw more than a dozen steam pumps being assembled in the spacious workshop. Because Emperor Rosal had not popularized the concept of production lines, more than a dozen steam engines were being assembled simultaneously. Although time-consuming and labor-intensive, the scene was spectacular. The entire workshop was filled with clanging and shouting. Some parts were too large and required complex pulley structures for lifting, or several people working together to lift them for installation. This was a scene of labor Hobert had never witnessed, lacking the speed of an assembly line, but feeling very simple and unadorned. Steam pumps were among the earliest use of steam machinery, primarily used for supplying water to high places and draining accumulated water from mine shafts. These machines ranged from the size of a carriage to as large as 2 locomotives, truly colossal. In front of a nearly assembled steam pump, Hobert saw a gentleman in his 40s, not very tall, leaning on a cane, smiling at him. "The last time I saw you, you were only 2 years old, smiling at me in your mother's arms." That smile could melt one's heart. Hobert stepped forward to greet him. "Hello, Mr. Dickos." Dickos, leaning on his cane, limped towards Hobert. "Commander Rex told me not to actively seek you out." "How did you find me?" "I once took on a mission with Mr. Harvey Hayden." Hobert tried not to look at the other's leg. "He told me I could find you here." "So it was that kid. I heard he's doing well in the mercenary world of Backland." Dickos smiled and pointed to his leg. "This injury was sustained in the South Continent. It was fortunate that your father's reinforcement was timely that time, otherwise I would have lost my life." He invited Hobert to sit in the reception room in the workshop. The clanging sounds outside always attracted Hobert's attention. No man dislikes machinery. Dickos used his hand to lift his injured leg, finding a more comfortable position to sit. "What you see is the second-generation pump. The first generation was a piston pump, which was prone to leaks. What you see now is a centrifugal pump. You might not have heard the term, centrifugal pump. It's a new invention that requires higher rotational speed from the steam engine. Of course, the efficiency of the second-generation pump has also greatly improved." Dickos recounted some knowledge about steam engines, and Hobert felt himself falling in love with these big machines. After a few more sentences, Hobert finally stated the purpose of his visit. "My adoptive father, Mr. Christine, told me a lot about Mr. Rex, who is my biological father. But he never spoke of anything my birth father did after returning to Backland. Now I have taken over Mr. Rex's burden and need to investigate the family curse, so I very much hope to know Mr. Rex's movements after he came to Backland and left the army." He spread his hands. "I once talked about this topic with Christine, but seeing his sorrowful expression, I couldn't bear to continue the conversation with him." "Commander Christine certainly wouldn't want to talk about it," Dickos said. "Those were the darkest days for both commanders." He sighed, as if lost in thought, and after a few minutes, he said, "We achieved too many merits in the South Continent. Commander Rex and Commander Christine were both excellent strategists. Under their planning, the situation in half of East Balam was eased. This would naturally make the Rune royal family wary. It was inevitable that they would be transferred back to Backland under the pretext of promotion. To prevent any accidents in Backland, Commander Rex took a mystical medicine to become a demigod on his way back to Backland. Just as Commander Rex expected, they were treated unfairly as soon as they were transferred back to Backland. This was the Rune royal family's show of force. Commander Rex, who had long lost the desire to continue serving, took this opportunity to leave the army and began exploring some fourth epic ruins or ancient sites." Hobert nodded. This was similar to his previous conjectures about Rex's whereabouts. "I'm not entirely sure which ruins Commander Rex explored," Dickos said, patting his injured leg. "Because of my injured leg, I couldn't follow Commander Rex on his adventures, so I had to come back and take over my father's business. However, I remember during a conversation between Commander Rex and Commander Christine, he mentioned that he put all his exploration notes in a place only his descendants could access." Hobert was stunned. "Is there such a place? Why don't I know about it?" Dickos smiled. "Young man, don't be impatient. Commander Rex made many arrangements for you. I was there when he made his will. He entrusted most of his property and knowledge to Commander Christine for safekeeping, and he made a simple plan for when to give you what." Dickos sighed with emotion. These two commanders truly were rare and genuine friends. Hobert nodded. "All right." Dickos's unspoken meaning was that he would not reveal too much information about Rex either. Hobert's current questions were because he had not yet reached the time when he could know that information. So, their conversation returned to steam engines. Dickos was surprised to find that Hobert's understanding of mechanics far exceeded his imagination. In this era, knowledge of mechanics was still cutting-edge knowledge that could only be learned in universities, and it was generally not open to foreign students. However, in the AD era, junior high school physics already contained a systematic description of mechanics. Especially for Hobert, who had seen internal combustion engines, the mechanical structure of a steam engine was not too difficult to understand. In the blink of an eye, the two talked for over an hour. Although they still wanted to continue, it was time for Hobert to leave. As he was leaving, Hobert pointed to a water pump outside, roughly the size of a locomotive, and asked, "What is the approximate price of this model of water pump?" "Around £800. Dykos smiled. "If we were trading with merchants from other countries, it might sell for £1,300 to £1,500. And we will also add an anti-disassembly structure, welding shut the casings of important structures and adding a mechanism inside. If forced disassembly occurs, the important structures will be destroyed." Hobert thought to himself, this structure is advanced, but it can't guard against apprentices, can it? Heh, this is the extraordinary world, the main point is that it's impossible to guard against everything. "Since you know I'm here, come and chat with me often," Dykos said. "Next time I'll take you to see the new type of crane." Hobert nodded and smiled. "Okay." At this moment, a water pump was assembled and began its trial run. When steam hissed out from the mechanical structure and the huge flywheel hummed, Hobert deeply felt the charm of this era. On the way back, Hobert roughly estimated that the cost of a locomotive-sized water pump was at most £200 or £300. What a huge profit! It could sell for £800, and if exported, the price would double. Hobert seemed to see the shadow of technological monopoly. In fact, the application of steam engines was already very widespread throughout the North Continent, but what Dykos produced were the most cutting-edge steam engines, representing the most advanced production level of the ruined kingdom. These cutting-edge applications, compared to common steam engines on ships or trains, had significant differences in mechanical structure. In Hobert's understanding, it was similar to the difference between a second-generation fighter jet and a fifth-generation fighter jet. Upon returning to the office, Hobert had just gotten off the carriage and paid the fare when a maid-dressed young lady approached him before he even entered the door, saying, "Mr. Hobert, I am Miss Audrey's maid, Annie. Miss Audrey has an urgent matter and requests your help. Please come with me to Viscount Glaine's mansion." Hobert was slightly startled, and after a moment of recollection, he confirmed that the young lady in front of him was indeed Audrey's personal maid. So, he got into the luxurious carriage bearing the Hall family crest and arrived at Viscount Glaine's residence. As soon as he entered the study, Hobert saw the four people inside all breathe a sigh of relief. Hobert took off his trench coat. "I heard Annie say that you've been waiting for me since this morning." In an era without mobile phones or telephones, finding someone in Backland was quite inconvenient. Audrey said, "Yes, I called an emergency meeting of the Justice League." Everyone took their seats around the desk, according to their previous positions. Hobert took a sip of tea and asked curiously, "What difficulty has our beautiful Miss Audrey encountered?" Audrey said, "I have a mission to announce at the gathering, to assassinate Bei Lang, the Intis ambassador to ruin." Cough, cough, cough. Hobert, who had been thirsty and drinking water since sitting down, choked on his tea. Audrey and the others saw this scene and found it both amusing and disappointing. Amusing because it was the first time they had seen Hobert lose his composure, and disappointing because even Hobert was so surprised, meaning he might not have the means to complete this mission. However, they were all mistaken. What surprised Hobert was actually, Mr. A didn't accept the assassination request for Bei Lang. Suddenly, he recalled the Night Watcher squad meeting he attended last week, where Thomas informed everyone that Hillman had secretly invited a Sequence 5 helper. Although both high-ranking members of the Aurora Order escaped, they were also severely wounded by 2 to 365. Hobert knew the power of that glove. Even a Sequence 5 spirit body would be injured and difficult to recover from for a while. Especially for Beyonders of the secret supplicant pathway, severe damage to their spirit body was an even greater blow to them. At the time, Hobert wondered if that helper might be Mr. A. Now it seemed it was indeed Mr. A, and his current state was very poor, which was why he refused this commission. Hobert thought for a moment before saying, "I have a channel to complete this mission." Chapter 208, Audrey's Offer. First, Hobert realized that the mission to assassinate the ambassador had to be completed, otherwise Kay might end up dead. This would not only cause Hobert to lose an ally with immense future power, but also deprive him of the Tarot Club, a crucial channel. This was a result Hobert was unwilling to see. Next was how to complete this mission. Hobert had imagined and rehearsed it more than once, with him personally attempting to assassinate Bei Lang. Without exception, the mission would end in failure. This was because many of his magical items were no secret to the Night Watchers. If he wanted to use those magical items, he had to ensure that the Night Watchers would not leak information about him. Given that Bei Lang was indeed a villain, there was a certain probability that the Night Watchers would not oppose such an action. However, with Thomas's motherly personality, he would certainly inquire about the source of the mission and what person initiated it and for what purpose. This would make things more complicated. Since Hobert himself would find it difficult to succeed, he had no choice but to redelegate the mission. For him, there were only two channels that could complete this mission, the Mercenary Club and Christine. The Mercenary Club channel was out of the question, as with their royal background, they would likely be even more inquisitive than the Night Watchers. Therefore, only the Christine channel remained. Christine herself would certainly not accept such a mission, but Hobert immediately thought of Christine's personal valet, Mr. Doffus. Mr. Doffus was also a powerful Beander, possibly a Sequence 6, or even a Sequence 5. Speaking of which, this master and servant pair was quite strange. Hobert felt that Christine was at most a Sequence 5, which matched his current military rank. If he were a demigod, even if he was not highly valued, he would at least have the rank and treatment of a lieutenant general or general. Yet, a powerful individual like Doffus was willing to disguise himself as Christine's valet. This was somewhat odd, considering that if he truly was a Sequence 5, he would be fully capable of establishing his own Beander organization. Although it was clear that Christine did not treat Doffus like a mere valet, he was, after all, a Sequence 5 powerhouse, and theoretically, he would find even the attire of a valet difficult to accept. Hobert did not ponder further but said to Audrey, "I have a channel to complete this mission." Audrey breathed a sigh of relief. Mr. Hobert was as reliable as ever. "But I need to go and ask that gentleman first, to see if he is willing to accept this mission," Hobert added. "No problem," Audrey said. "Will it take a long time? If not, I can continue to wait here." "You should go back first," Hobert said. "I don't know exactly how long it will take. Once I have a definitive answer, I will come to see you under the pretext of reporting on the entrusted situation." Audrey nodded. "Okay, but if it's too late, then I'll tell you tomorrow morning." "No, I'll have Susie, well, the golden retriever outside, I'll have her walk outside between 9 and 10 o'clock. If you encounter Susie at Earl Hall's mansion, you can write down the result and put it in her backpack." Hobert nodded. "No problem." He was about to get up when he suddenly remembered, "How much do you intend to pay for this mission?" Audrey said, "My budget is £5,000. "That's too little," Hobert chuckled. "In my opinion, this mission requires at least £10,000. Shu and Furs both took a deep, somewhat ungraceful breath, and even Viscount Glaint, who had inherited his family's wealth, was a little surprised. Audrey quickly made a decision. "Good." The three observers all sighed. He just agreed like that. Hobert immediately stood up. "I will go and inquire about that powerhouse's willingness right now." He put on his trench coat, picked up his cane at the door, and when he arrived in the courtyard, he saw Susie happily frolicking in the garden. Hobert smiled, quickly went out to take a carriage, and arrived at Christine's workplace, the Ruined Kingdom's General Staff headquarters. After being announced, Hobert entered the courtyard of a dark-colored office building. Whether it was the courtyard walls, the sentry posts, or the buildings themselves, everything gave a sense of solidity and difficulty to overcome. Arriving at Christine's office, Hobert explained his purpose. "I wish to entrust Mr. Doffus with a somewhat difficult and confidential mission." "Doffus is not here," Christine said. "He's in the suburbs. You can go and talk to him directly." Hobert immediately understood that Doffus was still at Jacob's team's excavation site. Speaking of which, Hobert had been so busy during this time that he hadn't had a chance to show his face. It was a good opportunity to see how the excavation was progressing. After bidding farewell to Christine, Hobert rented a taxi carriage outside and headed straight for the suburbs. It wasn't until dusk, after more than 2 hours of carriage ride, that Hobert arrived at Jacob's team's excavation site. After hearing his subordinate's report, Jacob quickly came out to greet him personally. "Hobert, the lawsuit you won for Dalen's friend was truly brilliant. It was only then that I learned that driving a steamship while drunk isn't considered drunk driving." Hobert was momentarily stunned, then immediately understood that Jacob probably hadn't read the newspaper for a long time, otherwise he would have complimented his performance in the work injury compensation case. After a few casual remarks, Jacob said, "I was just about to send you a letter. This Friday or Saturday, we'll be doing the final excavation. I invite you to come and experience it then." Hobert smiled. These were polite words, implying, you need to show your face, otherwise how will you participate in the profit sharing? He chuckled, "I have indeed been quite busy recently, and haven't had a chance to come over." You'll know what I've been busy with if you read the newspaper." He promised. "I will definitely be present at the final excavation." Then Hobert stated the purpose of his visit. "I'm here to see Mr. Doffus." "Where is he?" "Mr. Doffus is resting," Jacob said. "His tent is over here, please follow me." Upon arriving at Doffus's tent, Jacob tactfully left. Doffus was still the same, looking pale, cold, and taciturn. Hobert got straight to the point. "Mr. Doffus, I have a confidential matter to discuss. Should we go outside the camp?" "No need." Doffus's pupils suddenly deepened, and he made an opening gesture at his chest. The tent suddenly grew cold. Hobert felt the spiritual fluctuations around him. He opened his spirit vision and saw a phantom door appear on Doffus's body. A spirit, shaped like an inflated balloon, emerged from the door and quickly grew to the size of a normal person, slowly floating to the top of the tent. "All right," Doffus said. "No one will hear our conversation now." Chapter 209, Encountering Mr. Azek again. Seeing Doffus's ability just now, Hobert was certain this was a Sequence 5 gatekeeper. He was also a little puzzled. Was Christine really that charming? Charming enough to make a Sequence 5 willingly disguise himself as her male servant? Or was there some unknown secret involved? Hobert simply stopped thinking about the question and began describing the mission to assassinate Bei K. Lang. After Doffus listened, he was silent for a few seconds before asking, "Is this assassination mission very important to you?" Hobert answered truthfully, "It concerns the life and death of a friend of mine." Doffus was silent for a few more seconds, then asked, "How much compensation did they plan to give?" 10,000 gold pounds. Doffus said in a tone that betrayed no emotion, "It's a little too little." Then he said, "I accept this commission, but I have an additional condition." "Tell me." Doffus said, "Help me find the Sequence 4 feet undying, extraordinary characteristic of the death pathway, or clues to its main ingredients. If the clues are accurate, I will let you choose a magical item from me, or settle with gold pounds." Hobert was stunned, the thought of strongest male servant appearing in his mind. Christine's personal male servant was preparing to advance to a demigod. That seemed terrifying. Hobert cleared his throat and said, "No problem." He remembered that in Backland, there seemed to be a demigod from the Spiritual Teachings Order's Artificial Death faction. He had forgotten the specific name, but Hobert remembered that he was ostensibly a businessman, seemingly operating a garment factory. To Hobert, that was a walking, undying, extraordinary characteristic. However, that demigod was a byproduct of the artificial death plan. He wondered if using his extraordinary characteristic as a potion would lead to contamination from the artificial death. Then Doffus began to inquire about some of the mission's detailed information. "Do you have more detailed information about Bei K. Lang's Sequence 5 assistant?" "He is a Sequence 5 marionettist of the Diviner Pathway. As far as I know, he has been busy competing for a very valuable piece of intelligence in the past few days and is rarely by Bei K. Lang's side." Can you confirm the intelligence that Bei K Lang is a schemer of the Hunter pathway? It can be confirmed. After asking a few questions, Dofus said, I will observe Bei K Lang for 2 days, and act in 3 or 4 days at most. Hobert nodded, no problem. Dofus was not a talkative person. After the mission was assigned, there was really nothing for the two of them to talk about. So Hobert, after talking like a stand-up comedian for a while, got up to leave. Leaving the tent, Hobert also went to bid farewell to Jacob, who enthusiastically saw him off. In the dim light, Hobert saw something hanging in the center of the camp and asked about it. Jacob said, those are wild rabbits that Mr. Dofus caught from the ruins. Hanging them there is to attract their companions to come to their rescue. Hobert was surprised, this is the first I've heard that wild rabbits would rescue their companions. These rabbits are very intelligent, Jacob said. And they are very large. Just by looking them in the eye, your spiritual body can easily be injured. He whispered, Mr. Dofus said that these wild rabbits have been contaminated by the sealed artifact underground. They are actually monsters now, it's just that there are no signs of them losing control yet. Hobert nodded, and looked at the wild rabbits hanging there again, but the light was too dim to see clearly. Then he belatedly realized that Dofus hadn't mentioned this to him just now. How much he must dislike socializing and chatting. The carriage that brought Hobert was still waiting outside the camp. For the coachman, waiting was fine, as he was paid by the hour. On the way back to Backland, Hobert began to recall information about the Backland Artificial Death faction's demigod. Just then, there was a sudden whinny from the horses in front, and the coachman seemed to have used a lot of effort to control the carriage. Then he heard the coachman scolding, You, sir, although this is the countryside, you can't suddenly rush into the middle of the road. Sorry, I was distracted just now. Hobert, inside the carriage, was startled. It was Mr. Azek's voice. He opened the carriage door and looked forward. Mr. Azek, it really is you. It's already dark, let me give you a ride. I didn't expect to meet again here, Mr. Azek smiled. No need, I want to walk on my own. The coachman saw that Mr. Azek's attire did not look like someone who lived in the countryside, so he said, Sir, believe me, if you walk back to Backland, you'll be walking until late at night. Hobert thought to himself, that won't happen, he'll probably be back in a minute or two. Then Hobert seemed to think of something, Mr. Azek, let's go together. We've met again, don't you think it's a bit of a coincidence? Mr. Azek looked deeply at Hobert, nodded slightly, and got into the carriage. The carriage started moving again. Inside the carriage, Hobert smiled, Mr. Azek, you should be able to tell that I am a person with extraordinary abilities, and I can also feel that you are different. Mr. Azek slowly nodded, you are right. As I just said, according to some knowledge I have, if two people always meet by chance, it must mean something. Perhaps you can give me some help, or perhaps I can provide you with some clues. Mr. Azek frowned, how can I help you? Or what clues can you provide for me? Hobert spread his hands, I don't know either, this is only our third meeting after all. He smiled helplessly, fate is always unfathomable. Maybe we'll know why we've been meeting so often in the past few days after some time. This was Hobert's genuine thought. The two of them were beyonders of different sequences, so they shouldn't be meeting frequently due to the extraordinary characteristic aggregation law. It must be because of some other reason that they were meeting frequently, but even Mr. Azek hadn't noticed that reason, let alone Hobert, a sequence 7. Hobert said, I think it's very necessary for us to exchange contact addresses. If there's an urgent matter, we can find each other in a short time. Mr. Azek smiled, you seem to know a lot. Then he said, all right, if there's an urgent matter, you can write a letter and put it in the mailbox at 16 Wanbo Avenue, Hilton District. Hobert took out paper and pen to write down the address, and then wrote down the law firm's address and gave it to Mr. Azek. After a brief chat, Mr. Azek got out of the carriage and left. The coachman wanted to persuade him again, but Hobert had to tell the coachman that this gentleman lived nearby. The coachman shivered when he saw that the surroundings were all barren hills and wilderness. By the time they returned to Backland, it was already past 8 in the evening. Arriving at Earl's mansion in Queen's District, Hobert got out of the carriage not long before he saw Susie taking a stroll. At Earl Hall's villa, Audrey saw Hobert's letter and immediately breathed a sigh of relief. The fool's mission was finally entrusted. Given Hobert's usual reliability, the Beander he found should be strong enough. She reread the brief letter. I can't believe assassinating an ambassador costs so much money. Also, the additional conditions proposed by the other party are quite difficult. Audrey, the person who gave me the letter seems to know I can talk, Susie suddenly said. Audrey was surprised at first, then shook her head and smiled. Impossible, Hobert has only been here twice. He couldn't possibly know you've consumed a mystical potion. Theoretically speaking, yes. Audrey felt a little dizzy. Oh my, Susie is starting to talk theory. Susie's big mouth opened and closed, but according to my observation, when he was putting down the letter, several times it seemed like he was about to speak to me, but the words got stuck and turned into some irrelevant remarks. Audrey frowned. Of course, she trusted Susie's observation skills. But this made no sense at all. Hobert had barely met Susie a few times. Hobert, riding in a carriage towards Blanca Street, rubbed his rumbling stomach and secretly thought, that was a close call. Several times he almost asked Susie to pass a message for him, to remind Audrey to be careful about confidentiality. Hobert recalled Susie's image and realized that she was indeed a good candidate for a dog of fantasy. In front of her, people always found it easy to lower their guard. Back at the rental house, Hugh was already resting. Furs was still reading a magazine, clearly waiting for Hobert, and she had even left him a portion of dinner. Hobert praised Furz's thoughtfulness while wolfing down his meal. After Hobert finished eating, Furz came over to ask for the results. Upon learning that Hobert had successfully entrusted the mission, Furz also breathed a sigh of relief. Although she and Hugh hadn't been able to entrust the mission today, Audrey still gave them a £500 commission. This money made Furz and Hugh feel a bit unworthy, but Audrey insisted on giving it at the time, and they did take on some risks. However, after receiving the money, they still felt a bit bad, as they hadn't completed Audrey's commission. Knowing that the matter was entrusted made Furz feel a bit more at ease. Hobert cautioned, be careful about confidentiality. You and Hugh shouldn't discuss this matter outside. We know, Furz said worriedly, but I don't know about Mr. A. Hobert smiled. Those lunatics would rather Backland be as chaotic as possible. Besides, he was currently working hard on his recovery and didn't have time to deal with such matters. After the mission to assassinate the ambassador was entrusted, all that was left was to wait. And life had to go on. On Wednesday morning, Hobert appeared in court. Many reporters and citizens who had heard the news flocked to witness Hobert's powerful debate. Unexpectedly, the first thing the defendant did after being brought to court was to seek an out-of-court settlement with Hobert. It turned out that after learning that the plaintiff's lawyer was Hobert, the defendant had visited many law firms for over a week, but no lawyer was willing to defend him. Since lawyer Hugo had lost, ordinary lawyers, knowing they couldn't win against Hobert, simply refused to avoid humiliation, while the great lawyers valued their reputation and were unwilling to appear in court. It should be noted that due to the immense impact of the industrial injury compensation case, lawyer Hugo's business volume had sharply decreased, and no one wanted to follow in Hugo's footsteps. Hobert also hadn't expected that a case he had prepared for a week, and which was clearly somewhat difficult, would be resolved so easily. The reporters were also very disappointed, they had come for nothing. Hobert instructed Cody, who had come with him, don't be careless, your case won't be that easy to resolve. Cody gave a wry smile, I know. Of course, he knew that he didn't have Hobert's prestige and reputation. At 10 o'clock, Cody's case began. This case was also somewhat difficult. After repeated back and forth between both lawyers, a settlement plan was finally reached. During lunch, Hobert, as usual, summarized the mistakes and lessons from this round of debate for Cody, which greatly benefited Cody. After accompanying his three subordinates to court, Hobert gained a basic understanding of their abilities, and he would have a better idea when assigning cases in the future. As soon as he returned to the law firm, Jessica reported to Hobert, "There's a special client who has been waiting here since this morning. I don't know if I should accept her commission." Hobert asked, taking off his trench coat, "What's special about her?" "Well, she's a streetwalker. Jessica, I know you have some extraordinary abilities, so you'll never fall to this point," Hobert said. "In my opinion, streetwalkers, like those workers and farmers who cannot protect their own rights, are a tragedy of this era. I hope you don't look down on any client." Hobert's clear tone of reproach made Jessica blush a little. "I know, but I. Are you afraid it will affect my reputation?" Jessica said nothing, but she did think that. Hobert smiled. "My reputation will only be affected if I lose the lawsuit." Then he became serious. "Haven't you noticed? The clients who come to us basically regard us as their last hope. The hope of Backland's lower classes sounds good. Many years from now, we might even be the hope of this era." Jessica looked at Hobert excitedly. Who wouldn't want to leave their mark on an era? "Please bring her to my office," Hobert said, smiling at Jessica as she walked out. Still too young, so easily satisfied by a leader's empty promises. The client was named Emma, in her 20s, wearing Backland's most fashionable dress, with light makeup and a captivating charm in her brows. To avoid suspicion, Jessica also sat nearby to listen. Hobert quickly made a judgment. Emma was an experienced streetwalker, the kind who treated streetwalking as a job. She wasn't a part-timer, nor was she a woman sold into the red light district by human traffickers. The former's clothing wouldn't be so glamorous, and the latter wouldn't have much personal freedom. Emma smiled charmingly when she saw Hobert. "If lawyer Hobert ever patronizes our little shop, I'll definitely give you a discount." If they had the power to choose clients, they would, of course, prefer young, handsome, and gentle true gentlemen. Hobert smiled. "I don't have such a need for now." After a few pleasantries, guided by Hobert, Emma began to recount the case. Recently, there was a scoundrel named Wendell in the red light district who specifically patronized small shops, run by a few streetwalkers like Emma, and after their liaison, he wouldn't pay. Because such small shops couldn't afford thugs, many had already been taken advantage of by him. He had even boasted, "If you have the guts, sue me." Emma said. Some colleagues really did sue him, but they lost. Hobert asked, "Which lawyer did your colleague hire for the defense?" "They didn't hire a lawyer," Emma said. "The person suing Wendell was once a law firm assistant, but because the law firm suddenly went bankrupt." At this point, Emma made an expression that implied, "You should understand." Hobert nodded. "What's the general defense strategy?" "Although I attended grammar school for a few years, I'm very unfamiliar with the law and don't understand any defense strategies," Emma said. "I only know that she lost the case, and the reason was, prostitution fees are illegal gains and are not protected by law." She smiled. The judge's exact words seemed to be that Wendell's actions could only be subject to moral sanctions, but it was difficult to impose legal sanctions. "Heh. When the judges come to our neighborhood to spend money, I don't see them saying it's an illegal transaction." Hobert pondered for a moment. "This defense direction is problematic." He said, "I'll take this case. I'll submit the materials to the court in a while, and I believe Wendell will receive the summons by the day after tomorrow at the latest." Emma was first stunned, then showed a grateful smile and said, "Thank you for taking this case. I had almost given up hope." After Emma left, Jessica reminded Hobert, according to relevant laws, prostitution fees are indeed illegal income. If you accuse the other party of provoking trouble or debt issues, it will be difficult to establish. It also seems inappropriate to accuse them of theft or stealing other people's property. Hobert smiled and said, "I've said it more than once. If a defense direction makes it difficult to achieve our goal, then try a different direction." He said, "Especially for you, you need to be good at finding loopholes in the opponent's arguments, as well as loopholes in laws and regulations. You should also participate in this case, learn and observe more." Jessica nodded happily. "Okay. It was Friday evening, and staff members at the Intis embassy in Backland's West District were busy going in and out. Tonight was the most crucial time to seize the manuscript of the great scientist Tirani von Hermosius. To show his frankness, Klein, the ambassador of the Intis Republic, while instructing his assistant Rosigo to mobilize all forces to participate in the operation, also held a ball. This was to show that he was busy with other matters and had nothing to do with the manuscript seizure operation. Klein circled the ballroom and, seeing no omissions, took his personal male servant to the backyard before the guests arrived. As soon as he reached the backyard, Klein felt that something was off. He carefully looked around and first saw his respectful male servant, then the military attaché standing guard in the backyard, and a few servants moving wine from the warehouse to the front. Klein shook his head. There were over a dozen military attachés from the Intis Republic in the embassy, and they were all beyonders. For Klein, it was safe here. Continuing forward, he arrived in front of a small, independent bungalow. Klein stood at the door, frowning, opened the door from the front. Idiot. The personal male servant was visibly startled and trembled, then quickly stepped forward to open the door. Upon entering the small bungalow, that uneasy feeling reappeared. Klein frowned, then smiled. If someone were truly trying to harm him here, they would indeed be seeking death. There was only a table and a cabinet in the small bungalow. Klein lit 3 candles on the table, then drew an abstract symbol of a throne in the middle. Then he took out extraordinary materials from the small cabinet, burned them on the candles, and wisps of illusory white smoke drifted out, emitting a peculiar fragrance. Just as Klein was about to bow his head in prayer, a strange, cold voice suddenly spoke in the room. "I guessed correctly." Klein immediately became alert. At that moment, 2 feet appeared not far from him in front of the table, followed by legs, and then, moving upwards, a man with a pale face and cold expression appeared. This man was, of course, Dofus, who had come to assassinate Klein. Klein stepped back and deliberately asked loudly, "How did you get in?" "It's useless," Dofus pointed upwards. "No one can hear the sound from this room, including the entity you're about to pray to." At some point, the spirit, shaped like a balloon, had floated above their heads. Klein suddenly had the illusion that he was completely seen through. Impossible. He almost shouted, "Great King of War, Guardian of Intis, Master of Weather and Fog, Symbol of Chaos and Will." As expected, there was no reaction at all. Dofus smiled. "That's the honorific name of the former King of Intis, isn't it? I knew it, an angel wouldn't be killed so easily by Rosal." He pointed to the balloon above his head and said, "This natural spirit is very special. It can cut off the connection to the spirit world within a certain range. Not only can sounds not be transmitted outside, but it also cuts off all channels for your prayers to reach their intended recipient." Klein didn't hesitate and immediately retreated, preparing to escape through the door. Just as he made his move, a dagger suddenly appeared in his personal male servant's hand behind him, and it thrust forward into Klein's retreating body. Before this, Klein had no defense against his personal male servant, who easily succeeded. PFF'd. The dagger pierced Klein's lower back. In that instant, Klein reacted and kicked the male servant away, only causing him minor injuries. And his male servant suddenly flipped in midair, avoiding the window and directly hitting the wall. Thud. The entire small bungalow trembled, and the male servant's head was smashed. But the male servant seemed unaware that his head was smashed. He still calmly got up, held the dagger, and assumed an attacking stance towards his master. Klein did not continue to flee. As a hunter, he knew that when a fierce beast targeted him, merely fleeing would only expose his most vulnerable side to the beast. After he was ambushed by his male servant and failed to kick the male servant out of the window, he knew that if he continued to flee, he would only die faster. At this point, he had to keep a close eye on the beast and look for an opportunity to escape. "Didn't you notice? Your male servant has been dead for over half an hour." Dofus, who usually didn't talk much, suddenly became a bit chatty. These past few days, I've been observing you through the natural spirits in the embassy and also asked these natural spirits about your daily routine. I discovered a very interesting phenomenon. You often appear in this small room during the afternoon, and you don't allow anyone to disturb you. Unfortunately, there isn't a single natural spirit in this small room, so I couldn't directly know the answer. What are you doing in here? It took me several hours to figure out. Backland is so far from the Intis Republic. If there's urgent and confidential information that needs to be transmitted, how do you communicate with each other? Relatively speaking, telegraphs are far too insecure. The answer is almost obvious. You pray to an angel of the Intis Republic to report the situation here. Or you utter that angel's honorific name, and he gives you instructions. Bei K. Lang coldly stared at Dofus, guessing which power had sent this assassin. After all that, you should understand, right? Dofus said leisurely. Today, you are certainly going to die. That's not necessarily true, Bei K. Lang sneered. Dofus revealed a cold smile. Do you think the dagger in your male servant's hand is an ordinary dagger? Bei K. Lang was startled and immediately reached to check his wound. As soon as he moved, he realized that, unknowingly, his entire body had become stiff. His spirituality immediately made him aware that it wasn't his physical body that had a problem, but his spirit body that had been damaged. Looking at the dagger in the male servant's hand again, it was dark and gleaming, terrifying to behold. Dofus smiled. You're still quite quick-witted. If you had continued to flee just now, you would have only died faster. Oh, right, I also replaced the extraordinary materials you frequently burn. The replaced materials not only can't help you establish a connection with your supplicated object, but they can also accelerate the collapse of your spirit body. Bei K. Lang turned pale with fright and quickly tried to move towards the door, but his movements were already very stiff. He struggled for a long time and only managed to take one step. Are you wondering why I, being in the same room, am fine? Dofus asked and answered himself, because I am a dead person, and dead people don't need to breathe. The male servant stepped forward again and, under Bei K. Lang's unwilling gaze, easily slit the throat of the Intis ambassador. Bei K. Lang felt the blood gushing from his neck, his life rapidly draining away. Dofus reached out, and the male servant respectfully handed the dagger to Dofus. Then he fell to the ground, becoming a truly dead body. After confirming Bei K. Lang's complete demise, Dofus reached out and grabbed Bei K. Lang's spirituality, crushing it in his hand, completely severing the martial officer's means of communing with him. Then Dofus opened the illusory door on his body, pulled out a cloud-like spirit, and then put the balloon-shaped spirit from the roof back into the illusory door. The bottom of the cloud-like spirit was a gaping maw. Dofus glared at it, and the cloud immediately retracted its countless fangs, then opened its mouth wide and swallowed Dofus. This cloud could be invisible and pass through obstacles. Inside its belly, Dofus leisurely directed it to leave the embassy, passing among the patrolling martial officers and busy servants. More than 2 hours later, at 15 Minsk Street. K, who had just seen Ian off, had barely sat down on the sofa and hadn't had time to review Ian's account of the entire incident when the doorbell rang. Ding dong, again. Who? K's expression instantly tensed. His hands slipped into his pockets, touching his tarot cards and the word of filth, charm respectively. He then looked towards the window and mirror, but unfortunately, he couldn't find the bodyguard lady's shadow. However, he knew that the bodyguard lady must be in this room. K slowly walked towards the door, using his clown ability to foresee the scene he would see after opening the door. Under the crimson moon, a police chief in a black and white checkered uniform with 3 V-shaped chevrons on his epaulettes was impatiently waiting by the door. It was Chief Fasten, whom K had seen before. K quickly performed a divination, confirming that it was the real Chief Fasten, but he immediately thought that the other party was also a diviner and should be able to interfere with his divination. At this moment, the doorbell rang again, and K had no choice but to cautiously pull open the door. Chief Fasten outside said with a serious expression, The higher-ups sent me to tell you to pay attention to your safety tonight and tomorrow, and be wary of strangers. Understood, Kay nodded solemnly. Chief Fasten touched his short hair and said, additionally, there are some arrangements. I'll explain them to you in detail, and you can make your own decision. Kay invited Chief Fasten in and closed the door behind him. As the sturdy wooden door closed, Minsk Street under the crimson moon once again fell into a peaceful tranquility. However, 2 or 3 minutes later, a sound of argument seemed to erupt from inside the wooden door of 15 Minsk Street, but all discordant sounds quickly vanished. More than 10 minutes later, Chief Fasten opened the door with somewhat stiff movements. He avoided the light of the street lamps and quickly walked towards the Tasok River. If any unfortunate soul had clearly seen his face, they would have been scared out of their wits. Saturday morning, Blanca Street. During breakfast, Hobert always looked out the window at the street, and just as breakfast was nearing its end, he finally heard the newsboy's voice. Extra. Intis ambassador to ruin, Bei K. Lang, and his male servant killed each other in the backyard last night. Shu and Furs simultaneously looked at Hobert with surprise, while Hobert had already risen. One newspaper, please. The newspaper was bought, and the three of them, ignoring their food, crowded together to read its contents. Unfortunately, there were few details about Bei K. Lang's death. The reporter wrote, the marshal officers have sealed off the embassy. Surprisingly, the ambassador's assistant, Mr. Rosago, also did not appear. The entire embassy seems to be in chaos. The author learned from the servants that Bei K. Lang ambassador often treated his servants rudely and arrogantly, especially being exceptionally strict with his male servant. It is reported that this is likely the cause of the conflict between master and servant. The three people who knew Bei K. Lang was a Beander immediately realized that the newspaper's content was pure nonsense. Bei K. Lang is dead, Shu said with a hint of disbelief. Furs, meanwhile, quietly asked, did we succeed? Probably. Hobert put down the newspaper. An ordinary person, even with a sneak attack, couldn't possibly kill a Sequence 6 Beander. He was certain it was Dofus's doing, and it was done very cleanly, leaving no traces at the scene. Even the people at the Intis embassy wouldn't know where to investigate. This was consistent with Dofus's low-key personality. Only lunatics like the Aurora Order would make Bei K. Lang's death known to everyone. Hobert could almost imagine that Dofus must have acted only after having absolute certainty, and all his actions must have been calm and unhurried. When he made his move, Rosago was not at the embassy, and Bei K. Lang was simply no match for Dofus. A Sequence 5 has many ways to silently kill a Sequence 6. Especially with this kind of assassination, Bei K. Lang was completely unprepared, perhaps not even having the chance to use his sealed artifact. Hobert also thought, since Rosago has not appeared, it seems the Sequence 5 gift package has already been delivered to K. Just then, Miss Audrey's maid came to deliver a letter again. Opening the envelope, it was a check for £10,000. Shu and Furs, upon seeing the check, both ungracefully swallowed. Hobert put away the check. I'm not going to work today. I'm going to deliver the reward. Shu and Furs also wanted to go together to pay their respects to the strong individual who killed Bei K. Lang, but they also knew it was impossible. After finishing the rest of breakfast, Hobert took a taxi carriage to the suburbs. Yesterday, Jacob had already sent a message to Hobert that the final excavation of the ruins would take place today, and Hobert, wanting a share, naturally had to be present. Around 10 o'clock, Hobert arrived at the camp and was directly led into the ruins by the person waiting at the camp entrance. Upon arriving at the noble courtyard within the ruins again, the entrance to the vast underground structure was already surrounded by people. They were smoking cigarettes or pipes and chatting idly, and the overall atmosphere was quite cheerful. Mr. Dofus stood out among them. He was unwilling to chat with others, and others didn't dare to chat with him. After Hobert arrived, Dofus quietly said, a very high-level sealed artifact of the death pathway is sealed underground. Hobert was startled and immediately retorted, how high is the level? Dofus said indifferently, at least a grade 1 sealed artifact. Hobert's first reaction was that Jacob's team had hit the jackpot this time. On the way from the camp to the ruins, Hobert learned from the person leading him that the underground structure was composed of many rooms, each containing some antiques. These antiques might have been very ordinary 1,000 years ago, but because they were well preserved, they became very good quality antiques today. Although their value was not very high, there were many of them. Dofus ordered Jacob to replace some modern artifacts while moving out those antiques. Upon hearing this, Hobert understood that the entire underground structure might have been designed to seal a certain sealed artifact. And Dofus should have gradually squeezed the activity range of the sealed artifact by replacing the artifacts in the rooms. Until now, only 2 rooms remained unopened. Theoretically, the sealed artifact must be in these 2 rooms. It was precisely because there were too many rooms that the excavation had lasted for over a month. The antiques that were moved out were all stored in the camp, and it was said that they had already filled several tents. They would be sold together after the excavation was completely finished, to prevent people from knowing that few things were dug out here. The hired workers who had been working here had not returned home for over a month, and they were not allowed to leave even if they fell ill. After all these things were sold, at least 7 or 8 members of Jacob's team would be able to become genuine wealthy individuals in Backland. Christine, who provided protection, would also receive a very substantial sum of cash. And now, they could even dig out a grade 1 sealed artifact, which was something whose specific value was hard to estimate. If sold, it would be at least in the £100,000 range. However, Hobert estimated that the most likely scenario was that, after negotiation, Christine would take this grade 1 sealed artifact as a share for providing protection for this operation. It's no exaggeration to say that with a sealed artifact of this level, the prototype of a Beander family would be established. The reason there are so many adventurers and mercenaries in this era is that this is a legitimate way for ordinary people to get rich quickly. In Backland, if it's not a family that originally had industries, or whose ancestors were once nobles, the best outcome for an ordinary person who spends their entire life in business is to leave a little savings for their descendants. Most people might not leave any savings after a lifetime of business, and therefore, many people go bankrupt. Only a very, very small number of people seized opportunities and completely changed their own and their descendants' destinies. That's why everyone is so keen on adventure, because the probability of getting rich this way is greater, but the probability of losing one's life is also greater. While Hobert's thoughts were swirling, Dofus said again, "Remember Commander Rex's warning. If you feel danger, immediately close your eyes and don't open them, even if it means death." Hobert nodded repeatedly, and then he suddenly thought, could Mr. Azek have been attracted by this sealed artifact? Both coincidental encounters were because Hobert could come into contact with that sealed artifact. It's very possible. At this time, Jacob gave an inspiring speech and made a promise. After excavating the last 2 rooms, everyone would be paid triple their salary this week. For a moment, cheers and applause thundered in the ruins deep beneath the mud. As for how their internal team members would share the profits, a decision should have already been made before this. At the end of the speech, Jacob emphasized discipline, stating that only a portion of people would go down, while most would wait here, ready to transport antiques out. Moreover, after going down, all actions would be subject to Mr. Dofus's arrangements. After the speech, Dofus went down first, followed by Hobert and Jacob, among others. Arriving at the underground part of the noble courtyard again, Hobert saw that there were already many signs of human activity in the corridor. Long gone was the previous desolation and gloom. The underground passage was very long. Hobert briefly counted, one passage had at least dozens of rooms, and there were 8 such passages. That is to say, there were at least 500 or 600 rooms. No wonder it took over a month to move everything out. Even if there was only one chamber pot in each room, wanting to fill them with urine, wanting to collect them would take a lot of effort. Finally, they arrived at the last 2 rooms. While still some distance away, Dofus raised a hand. "You wait here." He went forward alone, adopting a defensive posture, and slowly pushed open one of the doors. The doors of these rooms were stone doors, which normally required 2 or 3 people to push open together, but Dofus pushed the door open with one hand. First, he pushed it open a small crack, vigilantly peered inside, and then pushed it fully open, moved the things inside out. Jacob was well prepared. Upon hearing Dofus's command, he waved his hand, and immediately 7 or 8 people went forward to move things, while another 7 or 8 people carried bottles and jars to put back into the room. After a period of busy work, everyone again distanced themselves from the last door. The sealed artifact must be in the last room. Dofus became extremely alert, slowly pushed open the stone door, and looked inside. Huh? Jacob quickly asked, "What's wrong?" Dofus said with a cold face, "It's not in here either." Jacob opened his mouth. "That's strange, we've checked all the other rooms." Dofus and Hobert said nothing. They thought of the same thing. The sealed artifact should have some kind of living characteristic. After a brief thought, Dofus said, "Replace the items in the last room, have the people above come down, and open all the doors." Logically, he had already set up a small trap in every other room. As long as the sealed artifact entered those rooms, he should have been able to detect it. Just as Dofus thought of this, deep in the underground corridor, many red lights suddenly appeared. Many people who saw these red lights cried out in pain, either kneeling on the ground or lying on the ground. These screams were particularly startling in the dim underground, and their painful expressions and body movements were even more terrifying. Hobert only glanced at it before quickly averting his gaze, yet he still felt his heart pounding. Jacob shouted, "Lower your heads, don't look around. You idiots who don't learn. Those are the eyes of wild rabbits." Dofus said, "They might know where that thing is." He walked quickly forward with a cold face. "Even if I don't find that thing today, I will destroy these wild rabbits." As he passed Hobert, he did not forget to instruct, "You stay here." Hobert nodded, "Okay." Jacob and the others knew that the eyes of these wild rabbits were extraordinary materials. Previously, it was difficult to catch the wild rabbits when they fought individually, but now that they were gathered together, Jacob and the others certainly did not want to miss this opportunity to obtain extraordinary materials. So most of the mercenary team members followed Dofus to chase the wild rabbits. It was then that Hobert realized that staying here seemed even more dangerous. Hobert was left with only 2 mercenary team members, both Sequence 9S and Sequence 9S, who were not skilled in combat. The 2 of them knew it would be difficult to catch the barbarian, and they might even become a burden, so they simply didn't pursue him. The remaining 20+ people were all ordinary individuals hired by Jacob, and over a dozen of them were replacing items in the last room under the direction of the 2 mercenary team members. Several people were still lying on the ground, ordinary individuals who had just made eye contact with the barbarian. No one had time to bother with them now. While directing the others, the 2 mercenary team members were also discussing the marvel of that sealed artifact. Of course, since there were still ordinary people present, they wouldn't use terms like sealed artifact, only phrases like that thing as a substitute. Hobert, however, felt that such a disguise was meaningless. If these ordinary people's memories weren't cleared, once the excavation here was over, many would learn about a high-level sealed artifact from the fragmented words of these laborers. Especially when Jacob sold a large number of antiques in Backland, people would immediately know that a huge treasure was buried here. Some people might even be persistent and, after Jacob's excavation ended and Christine's protection disappeared, come here to explore and see if there were any treasures Jacob and his team had overlooked. Just as he thought of this, Hobert heard the sound of a stone door opening behind him. He was somewhat surprised, as there was no stone door behind him. Just as he was about to turn his head to check, his spirituality stopped him. "Don't look. Looking will lead to death." Immediately following, a huge pressure and sense of threat swept over his entire body, making Hobert shiver. "Close your eyes quickly." But it was already too late. Hobert saw a cold, clear light flowing from behind him, and the 2 mercenary team members opposite him widened their eyes, unable to react, and fell directly to the ground. Hobert didn't have time to look at the others. He quickly closed his eyes and, according to the location in his memory, hid to the side. Because he walked too quickly, he bumped into the wall twice, tearing his clothes, but now was not the time to worry about that. The continuous thudding sounds of people falling around him seemed to remind him that danger was still approaching. A few ordinary people also closed their eyes at Hobert's reminder. What happened? What happened? Why did the people around me suddenly lose their breath? Hobert yelled. Keep your eyes closed, and run. Thump, thump. Hobert heard unhurried, yet muffled footsteps coming from behind him. He leaned on the wall and quickened his pace, only to hear someone else behind him say, Who? Who's there? Who's beside me? Why are you so hairy? Ah! A scream made Hobert's heart tremble. Other sounds from behind continuously struck Hobert's heartstrings. Help! That guy is right behind me. He's coming to get me, he's coming to get me. Then came several thudding sounds of people falling, and the sounds from behind became fewer and fewer. Extreme fear enveloped Hobert's heart. Fortunately, after the barbarian, Hobert's ability to resist mental attacks began to strengthen, and though his hands and legs trembled violently, he still gritted his teeth and moved forward. With the last scream, there were no more sounds from behind, only the muffled thump, thump of footsteps. However, these footsteps were very, very slow, as if the walker had difficulty with his legs. Hobert, who was moving quickly, finally found a corner, and when he entered another passage, the footsteps became much fainter. Hobert had just caught his breath when he suddenly heard the thump, thump of footsteps become clear again, right in front of him. He was startled. Did the other party have the ability to teleport? Or was this an illusion? Was it just luring him to open his eyes? Recalling Rex's previous warning, Hobert simply used the psychological spoon to give himself a psychological suggestion, only open his eyes after escaping danger. Then came the question of where to go. Should he continue forward, or turn back? Logically, the muffled footsteps were right in front, so he should turn back immediately, but who knew if it was his illusion? What if the other party's goal was to make him turn back? The thump, thump sound grew closer and closer. Hobert's breathing also became heavy. He simply hid on one side of the underground corridor, reasoning that it wouldn't be too late to react if the other party attacked him when they got close. Thump. Just as Hobert had the idea of waiting for the enemy, the sound abruptly stopped not far in front of him. Hobert's spirituality could sense that it was standing there motionless. Damn it! Hobert was cursing internally. What on earth is this sealed artifact? It's not supposed to play with people like this. After a few seconds of this eerie standoff, Hobert felt immense pressure from his spirituality. Continuing like this wouldn't work, his spiritual body wouldn't be able to hold on. Hobert's mind raced. After such a long standoff, the sealed artifact hadn't attacked him, indicating that it didn't possess many living characteristics. Hobert realized that the previous shouts of, "He's coming to get me," were likely illusions caused by extreme fear. Keep going forward. Hobert made up his mind and continued forward, feeling the stone wall. An ordinary person might choose to turn back, but the risk of turning back was actually as great as going forward, and going forward only had two outcomes: brushing past the other party, or bumping into the other party. Turning back might lead to escape, but it was more likely to lead into new, unknown difficulties. So Hobert chose to go forward. At least the outcome was known, and in the extraordinary world, the unknown often represents danger. He could feel that a powerful presence was right in front of him, constantly watching him. Hobert suddenly let out a laugh to bolster his courage. 1 step, 2 steps, passing the powerful presence without incident, and the unsettling feeling of being watched disappeared with it. Hobert let out a long breath. Indeed, as long as he kept his eyes tightly shut, the other party wouldn't attack him. Thinking this, Hobert turned another corner, unconsciously quickening his pace. After only a few steps, Hobert tripped over something on the ground. Strange, there was nothing in the corridor when he came. He bent down and touched it. Immediately, cold sweat poured down. Under his feet was a skeleton. When he came, there were no skeletons in the corridor at all. Hobert belatedly realized that he had just turned a corner after passing the sealed artifact. How could he turn again so quickly? There was only one answer, which was that Hobert had entered an open stone door. The only open stone door now was probably in the room where that sealed artifact was located. Thinking of this, Hobert felt his heels go soft. But misfortunes never come singly. At this moment, Hobert's spirituality once again felt the gaze and pressure from behind. The sealed artifact was returning to this stone chamber. Hurry and leave. With that thought, Hobert got up and moved to bypass it, but as soon as he stepped out, he was tripped again by something hard and fell forward. However, as a sequence 7, Hobert twisted his body and immediately stood firm, not falling. But because of this turn, his hand left the wall, causing him to completely lose his sense of direction. Moving quickly to the right to find the wall again, Hobert suddenly touched a layer of hard feathers. The instant he touched the feather, Hobert felt a spiritual shock, as if he saw a towering, pale stone pillar. Just a single stone pillar brought a huge impact to Hobert's mind. Hobert quickly withdrew his hand, realizing that the feather's owner was of a higher status than the entity outside that couldn't be viewed directly. However, it seemed to be in slumber, or perhaps it was already dead. That's why Hobert only felt a mental shock when he touched it, instead of collapsing into a pile of flesh and blood. But now was not the time to ponder these things. Hobert crouched down, reaching in the opposite direction of the feather's owner. When he touched the skeleton on the ground again, Hobert felt a sense of familiarity. Using the skeleton's position, Hobert re-found the stone wall and quickly walked out, leaning against it. He once again brushed past the creature or sealed artifact that emitted a dull thudding sound. Soon after, Hobert heard the stone door close behind him, and the fear that had lingered in his heart vanished. Hobert nearly collapsed to the ground. He forced himself to walk on, step by step, as the sense of danger from his spirituality gradually faded. To be safe, Hobert walked for another 10 minutes or so before confirming he was out of danger. Slumping to the ground to rest, Hobert felt as if he had been watching horror movies all day. The fear was so intense that he didn't even want to recall what had just happened. He could open his eyes now. In fact, he could have opened them earlier, but to be safe, Hobert had kept his eyes tightly shut. Hobert's eyes gradually adjusted to the dark corridor. This was an unfamiliar place. However, the underground structure wasn't complicated. Hobert estimated that he could find a familiar path after a few turns. It was then that Hobert belatedly thought, why didn't he use the teleportation statue just now? If he had held the teleportation statue in his hand, he would at least have had a general understanding of his surroundings. But then Hobert realized it was because the oppressive power of the sealed artifact was too strong. Fear had filled his entire mind, leaving him no energy to think about such things. This was a genuine mental attack, or a negative status. Fortunately, his ability to resist mental pressure was good. Ordinary people would easily collapse under such mental pressure. When one's mind is filled with fear, only one thought remains: run. Nothing else matters. Hobert also thought that it might have been his spirituality that prevented him from using the teleportation statue. Perhaps using that sealed artifact would have led to disastrous consequences. After all, he had used the psychological spoon, which showed that even though he was in a sorry state and eager to escape, he still retained basic rationality. Thinking of the stone door that might have teleportation ability, or the sealed artifact with teleportation ability, Hobert increasingly felt that it must have been his spirituality that stopped him from using the teleportation statue. As for the reason, Hobert naturally didn't know now and could only temporarily ignore the question. After resting for a while, Hobert felt much better and continued to get up and walk forward. As he expected, after 2 turns, he found the way he had entered the underground structure. After walking for another 10 minutes or so, he returned to the noble courtyard in the ruins. There were still many people outside. They didn't know what had happened inside and were still chatting and smoking with smiles. The two mercenary team members who remained outside noticed Hobert's very strange expression and quickly gathered around to ask, "What's wrong? What happened?" Hobert found a stone stool and sat down. "I'll tell you later. Give me a cigarette." In the Ad era, he used to smoke, but he stopped after transmigrating. He had already decided to quit, but now, he desperately needed a cigarette to calm down. He had just taken 2 puffs when there was movement at the entrance to the underground structure again. Dofus emerged first, and seeing Hobert sitting on the stone stool smoking, he breathed a sigh of relief. Jacob followed behind him, his face paler than Dofus's, his eyes vacant, and he was carrying a large wild rabbit. The few people behind Jacob also looked as if they had lost their souls. At this moment, someone asked, "Where are the others?" "They're all dead." Jacob trembled all over, but still didn't let go of the wild rabbit in his hand. "They're all dead." All dead. How did they die? No matter how chaotic the surroundings were, Dofus's somewhat flustered expression quickly disappeared, and he became expressionless again. He had been flustered just now because he was worried about Hobert's safety. Seeing that Hobert was fine, he made a door opening gesture on himself and said, "That might be a grade 0 sealed artifact." Hobert opened his mouth, marveling at his luck, being able to walk around in front of a sealed artifact of that level and still be alive and kicking. Praise. Who should he praise? Lost in thought, Hobert felt something. He opened his spirit vision and saw Dofus pulling a winged skeleton out of that illusory door. The wings were made of densely packed small bones, looking quite artistic. The skeleton flew up and circled above their heads. Hobert's eyelids immediately felt heavy, but when Dofus placed a hand on Hobert's shoulder, the strong drowsiness disappeared. The people around, still questioning, still doubting, still panicking, fell one after another. Hobert opened his mouth, but still didn't speak to stop it. A grade 0 sealed artifact was enough for Dofus to go on a killing spree. Instead of worrying about those who had fallen, Hobert should worry about his own safety. Who knew if Dofus would simply kill him to silence him and monopolize the sealed artifact? At this moment, Dofus coldly explained, "It's also unreasonable for all of them to die. This flying spirit can reweave everyone's memories in their dreams. Let me think. It can be disguised as them having an internal conflict over wealth, which led to so many deaths." Hobert, who had already been considering begging for mercy, breathed a sigh of relief. In that case, he wouldn't have to die either. Dofus began to get busy. He moved around the noble courtyard and even the ruins. Soon, bodies emerged from underground one after another in a line. Hobert, who was silently watching the show from the side, understood that there was a limit to the distance Dofus could control the bodies. He moved around to appear directly above the bodies, keeping them within his controllable range. The bodies that emerged from underground included both ordinary people and beyonders. Each beyander's body held its own extraordinary characteristic. Dofus first manipulated the bodies to seal the entrance to the underground, then he borrowed the power of the underworld and performed a mystical seal. Unless a demigod personally comes to investigate, it will be very difficult to discover this entrance, Dofus said confidently. And if the outside world didn't know there was a grade 0 sealed artifact here, a demigod wouldn't idly come to such a excavated ruin. Then Dofus, like a director, designed the positions of Jacob's team members, had the bodies kill themselves again with sharp weapons, and cut wounds on Jacob and the others to fake traces of a struggle. Once everything was set, the winged skeleton appeared again, flying back and forth above everyone. Everyone sat up one after another. There had been an intense shootout just now, and they were too tired, so they had lain on the ground to rest. Riding in the carriage back to Backland, Hobert looked at the sun in the sky, feeling a sense of unreality about everything that had happened underground. Currently, only he and Dofus knew about the Sequence 0 sealed artifact inside. It was only now that Hobert was certain Dofus had no intention of killing him to silence him. Besides reminding him to keep it a secret, Dofus also said that he would inform Christine about the sealed artifact. This made Hobert speculate again about Christine and Dofus. What had they experienced together to forge such a strong relationship? That was a Sequence 0 sealed artifact. With such an item, establishing a mysterious organization that could last for hundreds or thousands of years would be no problem. Could Dofus actually resist such a temptation? Hobert had considered this question 3 times already, but still couldn't figure it out. However, he guessed that Dofus's actions were nothing more than 2 starting points. First, he had his own principles, or he knew his own limitations and couldn't seal that sealed artifact. Second, he had a higher ideal. Hobert leaned towards the former. Dofus had always seemed indifferent to fame and fortune. He barely reacted when he received the £10,000 check earlier. Furthermore, facts proved that Dofus indeed failed to find a sealing method, and he currently had no confidence in sealing it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have spent so much effort on disguise. It would have been better to just take the sealed artifact away. The second scenario was not impossible either, because Dofus had a higher ideal than a Sequence 0 sealed artifact, so he didn't even care about such external possessions. Hobert shook his head, no longer dwelling on the issue. Then he thought of another matter. Should he tell Mr. Azek about what happened here? Hobert also coveted that Sequence 0 sealed artifact, but he also knew that he would be unable to control it in the short term. Of course, the most crucial point was that Hobert needed Mr. Azek's help. These past few days, whenever Hobert had free time, he was planning his second bribe to the fool. His plan was to use this opportunity to sacrifice a blasphemy card to the fool. This was to prevent Klein from failing to save Little, the son, or causing Source Castle to change hands later because he took the Black Emperor card. In Backland, Hobert only knew about the Red Priest card in Medici's hands. When he first started thinking about this problem, Hobert only considered it briefly before abandoning the idea. Because according to Hobert's analysis, Medici's evil spirit later possessed Ince Zangwill, and he had never been able to fully control Ince. However, Medici later completely turned a gatekeeper into his puppet. So Hobert roughly guessed that Medici's evil spirit should have the strength of roughly Sequence 4 at this time. For a Sequence 7 like him to try and extort the Red Priest card from a Sequence 4 would be courting death. Even if he could scare Medici with the power of the Country of Disorder, Hobert was afraid of attracting George III again. He had already brushed past His Majesty the King twice, and it was only because he was merely Sequence 7 that they only brushed past. If he used the power of the Country of Disorder too frequently in Backland, it would eventually attract George III's attention. So Hobert just thought about it and decided to give up. But after meeting Mr. Azek, Hobert had a new idea. He could completely ask Mr. Azek to hold Medici down while he searched for the Red Priest card. Mr. Azek's status was not only higher than Medici's current one, but he was also the bane of ghost-like creatures. Medici and the other two would probably tremble just by seeing Azek. The only thing to be careful of might be Adam's gaze. After all, it was Adam who needed Medici and the other two into one evil spirit. Later, when Ince traveled thousands of miles to deliver 008 to Adam, Medici's evil spirit played a role in forcing Ince to seek exorcism help in the South Continent. Perhaps the current Medici was also part of Adam's story. However, if he only took one card from Medici, it wouldn't affect Adam's story, and Adam shouldn't intervene. After forming this plan, Hobert considered how he could persuade Mr. Azek to help. Hobert even thought about directly telling Azek his true identity. But how to package this information became a new problem. After all, he was only a Sequence 7, and knowing too much was dangerous. Then the clue to this Sequence 0 sealed artifact could perfectly serve as a thank you gift for Mr. Azek's help. It was just that this deal seemed a bit unprofitable. A Sequence 0 sealed artifact exchanged for just one blasphemy card. Thinking this, Hobert shook his head. No. He had entered that stone chamber. If he thought carefully, there were actually 2 sealed artifacts in that stone chamber. One was the owner of the feather, and the other was a sealed artifact with a certain level of activity that would kill anyone who looked at it. It was very likely that Dofus had misjudged, and they were 2 sequence 1 sealed artifacts, or 1 sequence 0 and 1 sequence 1 sealed artifact, or a combination of 1 sequence 1 and a special existence. Hobert was more inclined to believe that there was a sequence 1 sealed artifact and a special existence in the stone chamber. That special existence from the death pathway might be very important to Azek, which was why it attracted Azek to appear around the ruins. He could negotiate terms with Azek, ensuring they both had the opportunity to choose from the spoils obtained during this exploration. Given Azek's personality, there was no need to worry about him killing to silence. Hobert believed that as long as he participated in the operation, he should be able to obtain one of the sealed artifacts. Having made up his mind, Hobert planned to visit Azek next week and begin his plan to seize the blasphemy card. With these plans, Hobert looked at the sun in the sky again. He felt as if he had developed a psychological shadow from ancient ruins. At this moment, he suddenly thought of the Harvest Church and Bishop Utravsky. Although that church was not large, the feeling it gave people, if not healing the scars of the soul, could at least relax one's entire spirit. Hobert decided that if he had time recently, he would visit Bishop Utravsky, as he still hadn't finished reading the Life Bible. Back on Blanca Street, Hobert changed his clothes and lay on the bed, not wanting to get up. The prolonged high mental tension today made him very tired. He fell asleep as soon as he lay down and had some chaotic dreams. After resting for a night, Hobert felt his spirituality had recovered well, and his mental state was also very good. He then used his own method of praying to himself to send the prisoner, extraordinary characteristic from the country of disorder to the real world. He hadn't attended the mercenary club's gathering for 2 or 3 weeks, and he planned to start monetizing the extraordinary characteristics he held today. After much thought, he decided to sell the prisoner, madman, and werewolf extraordinary characteristics in 3 separate transactions. These extraordinary characteristics came from Elliot's previous sacrifice. At that time, he sacrificed a werewolf extraordinary characteristic, and Hobert used the power of the country of disorder to shatter this extraordinary characteristic, thus obtaining the 3 main ingredients mentioned above. It was still morning when he arrived at the mercenary club. Hobert first went to the information wall on the 3rd floor to check. The task of finding the mastermind behind the thief, posted by Simon Vincent, had not yet been completed. Although Hobert had clues, he was not interested in this task. None of the other tasks interested Hobert, so he asked the waiter to post the task of finding and capturing Hillman at the mercenary club. As for the task of finding Heyman, since he had clues, he planned to undertake it himself. Hobert had long prepared the detailed information about Hillman that he had obtained from the Night Watcher squad. After handing the information to the attendant, Hobert went to look at other information on the information wall. Among the publicly available information, Hobert found a very valuable piece of information. He remembered seeing people forming teams to seize gold from the Intis Republic's colonial plunder sites in the South Continent when he first came to the mercenary club. Now, the follow-up to that operation had arrived. Although many people died, they were very successful. However, even though they used every method available, they could not take all the gold there. By the time Intis's reinforcements arrived in the colony, over 100,000 pounds of gold had been protected by them. The Intis Republic knew that the location where they had hidden the gold had been exposed and feared that other forces would covet it, so they simply transported this batch of gold, along with much silver and many gems, back to the Intis Republic. The wealth plundered by that team of mercenaries was enough to allow them to live as rich men for the rest of their lives, so they simply sent people to monitor when the Intis Republic's ship would set sail and what route it would take. They released this information, hoping that their colleagues would also have a chance to get rich. However, they also warned their colleagues not to take risks if they lacked strength, because the person escorting this batch of valuables was an Intis Republic Commodore, a very famous strongman in West Bayland. Hobert estimated that the message the other party wanted to convey was, that is a sequence 5. At the same time, he believed that the other party would very likely also possess at least a level 2 sealed artifact. An opponent of this level is already very difficult to deal with, and if it's at sea, it's even more difficult. First, one needs a ship, experienced sailors, and the action squad must have enough strong individuals. Hobert was about to look at the next piece of information when he suddenly thought that he could sell this news to the Hanged Man. Of course, it wasn't to ask the Hanged Man to steal this gold, that would be equivalent to sending him to his death. He could let the Hanged Man resell this news, the Hanged Man would earn an information fee, and Hobert would earn an information intermediary fee. So Hobert noted down the details in this piece of information before starting to look at the next one. As he looked through them one by one, the other pieces of information were not very important to Hobert. Soon it was lunchtime, and Hobert went to the restaurant to eat, where he met an acquaintance, the masked man who had given Hugh a mission. However, he wasn't wearing a mask today, he was in his 30s, and his appearance was very ordinary, the kind that would be hard to find again if thrown into a crowd. After Hobert accompanied Hugh to meet the masked man at Mr. A's gathering, he specifically inquired about him. The masked man was named Byron, but no one knew which department Byron was an officer of. Both were attending the gathering, and since neither of them knew anyone else, the two of them chatted idly. After the gathering began, the two of them went together into the underground theater and sat together. The gathering here was still the same. First was the team-forming segment, where some recruited teammates to rob the Intis Republic's gold-laden ship, some recruited teammates to explore a newly discovered uninhabited island, some recruited teammates to complete an assassination mission in the Feniport Kingdom, and some recruited teammates to search for the treasure of an ancient Beander family. Although many people were recruiting teammates, there haven't been any major operations recently. Next was the trading segment, still proceeding from the front row, selling or seeking items in sequence. Because there haven't been any major operations recently, there weren't many good items for sale. However, there were still extraordinary characteristic transactions. Hobert, who had participated in other Beander gatherings, only now realized that only the mercenary club openly bought and sold extraordinary characteristics. In other gatherings, transactions of extraordinary characteristics usually took place behind the scenes. Hobert only thought of this question today: why was the transaction volume of extraordinary characteristics so large at the mercenary club's gatherings? Just as it was almost Hobert's turn, he took out the wooden box containing the main material for prisoner in advance, and before he could call out, Byron next to him asked, "Are you selling another extraordinary characteristic?" Hobert nodded. Anyway, he was going to announce it soon, so there was nothing to hide. The other party didn't ask what pathway the extraordinary characteristic was from, but directly and quietly said, "I'll take it." Hobert paused before saying, "Prisoner. £290. Last time I sold it for £300. Then £300. After the gathering, we'll trade in the reception room." Hobert nodded and put the wooden box away. About half an hour later, the gathering ended, and Hobert and Byron agreed to meet in a small reception room. After Byron inspected the goods, he paid promptly. Hobert counted the money, confirming it was correct. Byron smiled. "In the future, if you have any extraordinary characteristics to sell, you can contact me directly, especially when you need money urgently. You don't have to wait for a gathering to cash in." Hobert asked, "You don't ask about the origin of the extraordinary characteristic?" "No questions. Do you buy extraordinary characteristics from all pathways?" "All of them," Byron said, taking out paper and pen and writing an address. "If you have an extraordinary characteristic to sell, send a letter to this address. The content of the letter should be, 'Goods arrived.' After I receive the letter, I will come to the mercenary club to trade between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. the next day. If I don't arrive by 10 a.m., it means something came up temporarily, and the trade will take place at the same time the day after." Hobert put away the address and asked, "What do you do with these extraordinary characteristics once you acquire them? Do you turn them all into magical items? To preserve value? To plunder gold from the South Continent?" Byron smiled. "Extraordinary characteristics are more valuable than gold. No matter whether currency depreciates or not, they will not depreciate. At the same time, they also have strategic significance. For example, for extraordinary characteristics of the prisoner pathway, we annually make the Rose School exchange large amounts of gold for the related pathway's extraordinary characteristics that we possess. Then we will continue to strike the Rose School, seize new extraordinary characteristics, and then make them exchange gold for them again. Hobert didn't expect such an operation. What if they don't exchange? Then we'll intensify our strikes, Byron said. Until the main material for prisoner skyrockets, at which point, as long as we are slightly cheaper than the market price, they will be snapped up by local beyonders. Hobert finally understood why some evil extraordinary organizations were always so poor. When it came to manipulating people, one had to look at the gentlemen of Ruin Kingdom. He asked again, striking the Rose School, we also lose beyonders, how do we compensate for this loophole? That's the advantage of official beyonders, Byron said. Most of the time, we can calmly recover extraordinary characteristics. Hobert nodded, which meant that they completely treated the low-sequence military beyonders who had no backing or connections as cannon fodder. South Continent, no existence town. Elliot brewed tea and brought it to the living room for the guests. These guests were all residents of no existence town, and they had come to inquire about the process of Elliot's sister Moira's recovery. In this town, every family had relatives who had gone mad. Elliot told them about the greatness of the Creator, and at the end of his description, he said, "This is an opportunity to save the entire town, to save the entire family." However, what he received in return was the guests' silence. They all possessed some knowledge of mysticism and were cautious about the Creator, whom they had never heard of. Elliot smiled and drank all the tea in front of him. It's noon. I won't keep you all for lunch. He had long been accustomed to such attitudes, knowing that these family members were still observing. After seeing off the guests and tidying up the teacups, Moira said, "Little Elliot, Elder Calvin has already come looking for you twice. You can't stay at home anymore." But Elliot looked at his sister. I know. Moira smiled and said, "I know you want to stay at home and spend more time with me. Sister is already well, and we'll have plenty of time together in the future, but this opportunity for family assignment is only this once." Elliot said, "If I go to the copper mine, I might only be able to come home once every 2 or 3 months. Moira smiled and said, "Normally, I can tell our relatives about the greatness of the Creator at home. If I miss you, I can come see you, my silly brother. God-forsaken land, Silver City." Having passed the instructor assessment, Derek could not hide his joy. Starting tomorrow, he would begin patrolling within Silver City and its surroundings. These areas were all within the safe zone, and during patrols, he would not encounter overly powerful monsters. In fact, most monsters were ordinary ones, and killing them would not yield extraordinary materials. However, with each patrol, Derek could earn a certain amount of merit. Merit could be exchanged for extraordinary materials, extraordinary potions, extraordinary weapons, sealed artifacts, and potion formulas for several sequences, such as Giant and Dragon, among others. In the black market, one could also buy food, daily necessities, and some extraordinary materials or unsequenced potion formulas. Merit could be regarded as the legal currency of Silver City. Derek planned to accumulate some merit, first to repay Mr. Emperor's debt, and then to buy a weapon from the black market. Once he passed the second round of assessment, he would be able to patrol further away, earning more merit with each patrol, and even asking teammates for help to acquire some extraordinary materials. While planning for the future, Derek returned to his room. Prepare for the gathering. Derek heard that supreme voice in his ear. He took a deep breath, calmed himself, and began counting his heartbeats. However, Derek still couldn't hide his excitement, and his heart beat too fast. This time, he counted over 1,000 beats before the gray fog covered his vision. Derek reappeared in the Giant's palace, and the new tarot club began. "Oh, there's a new member." The others also looked at the new member. Miss Justice Audrey greeted everyone as usual, but she kept observing the new member in a black robe sitting at the lower end. The hanged man, Alger, meanwhile, began to guess the new member's identity. Was he from a special region? Or did he possess special abilities? Emperor Hobert smiled and thought to himself, Mr. Fool's alt account is online. The fool, Klein appeared calm, but he was trying to adapt to the state of one person with two perspectives. After Audrey finished greeting, Klein leaned back in his chair and said, "This is a new member, Mr. World." "Hello." Audrey, very politely, was the first to greet the new member. Alger and Derek followed closely. When it came to Hobert, after greeting, he mischievously smiled and said, "You look very familiar, Runus. Have we met somewhere before?" Audrey curiously observed Mr. World, then turned to observe Mr. Emperor. Unless he was a new member developed by Emperor, there was only a very small chance of encountering an acquaintance at the Tarot Club, right? Alger didn't react much. He guessed that Emperor might be trying to get information. Derek was a little envious. How nice, to meet someone you know at the Tarot Club. Klein, behind the gray fog, scratched his head a little. It couldn't be such a coincidence that the person randomly created looked so much like Emperor's acquaintance. He manipulated the world to say to Emperor, "You might have mistaken me for someone else. I don't remember seeing you anywhere. Although the gray fog covers your face, I recognized you at a glance." Hobert continued, "You don't have to pay back the money you owe me. Now, do you dare to acknowledge me?" At this moment, Klein, behind the gray fog, had already discovered through spirit vision that Hobert was lying. He immediately felt a bit helpless and amused. How cunning. To joke with a new member like this, isn't he afraid the new member will leave the Tarot Club? Klein manipulated the world to say, "You really got the wrong person. It's over, the aloof persona has collapsed. All right, both of you." Audrey, with a smile, smoothed things over. "Let's start the gathering." She had also understood that Mr. Emperor was joking, but she didn't understand why Mr. Emperor, who always seemed so serious, suddenly joked with a new member. Perhaps they really knew each other. Ha ha ha, participating in such a secret tarot club, and actually encountering a creditor. Mr. World is really unlucky. Alger couldn't help but curl the corners of his mouth, watching the new member get flustered. Derek hesitated whether to advise Mr. World to repay the money. After all, not paying debts was a very bad act. At this moment, the fool said to Justice, "The two candidates you proposed are still under investigation. I'll give you a simple task, you can entrust it to them in your name. This is part of the investigation." As soon as these words were spoken, the previous farce was considered over. Audrey thought, it should be this strict. So, the fool handed the task of finding Lan Urwusi to Audrey. Then Alger once again offered 6 pages of his diary to Mr. Fool. After Mr. Fool finished this week's reading time, he said to Justice, "Miss Justice, you did very well. You dealt with Bei K Lang in less than a week." Audrey slightly raised her chin, a bit proud. She quickly admonished herself, "Audrey, don't be proud. This matter was completed so smoothly thanks to Mr. Hobert." At the same time, she saw the hanged man's surprised expression, and the world asked, "You sent someone to kill Bei K Lang?" This made Audrey feel a surge of satisfaction, and she couldn't help but raise her chin again. As for Emperor, he wasn't surprised, which didn't surprise Audrey. After an investigation, she felt she was close to pinpointing Emperor's identity. Emperor was also in Backland, so he definitely knew about Bei K Lang's death. Bei K Lang's matter was concluded, which made Alger sigh at the growing power of the Tarot Club. An ambassador was killed just like that. Then, the world initiated a new transaction in a hoarse voice. "I wish to obtain the true root of a mist treant, at least 60 milliliters of its corresponding sap, the medullary crystal of the elf spring, and all the spinal fluid of a demonic patterned black panther. Who among you can provide these, or have relevant clues? What do you wish for me to exchange them for?" Hobert immediately realized the cleverness of using a small account. If the fool were to seek extraordinary materials of the sequence 7 level, it would certainly arouse suspicion among the Tarot Club members. Using a small account for the request was perfectly reasonable. Hobert thought that if the creator found it inconvenient to appear in the future, he could also register a small account. Hobert had channels to acquire these materials, but he didn't plan to participate in the transaction. In his opinion, reselling extraordinary materials was too slow to earn money and carried certain risks, making it unprofitable. Derek stated that he could obtain the true root and sap of the mist treant. He hoped to get a weapon suitable for him. However, it will take some time before I can get these extraordinary materials, Derek said. He needed to complete the second round of assessment before he could join a more distant patrol team and encounter mist treants. Audrey and Alger also agreed to help the world keep an eye out for relevant clues. Then Alger said to Emperor, "A few days ago, when I came ashore, I heard a clue about a sealed artifact with travel ability. I will help you inquire about it this week." Hobert smiled. "Finally, there's news. If the transaction is completed, I will pay you a commission." He said, "Additionally, I have a piece of information here that can be sold for a high price. You can also look for buyers on the sea. How about we split the profits?" Alger was startled. "I must confirm if it's valuable. A ship full of gold and jewels." Hobert smiled. "To be honest, if I had the travel ability now, I'd want to cooperate with you to seize that ship of treasures." "Such news is indeed very valuable," Alger said, "provided that not many people know about it." Hobert recalled the information. "No one on the sea should know about it yet, but it's hard to say in 1 or 2 weeks, because as far as I know, some people have already started recruiting teammates in Backland, preparing for a big venture at sea. Once this group of people sets sail, I don't think it will be long before this news is no longer so secret." Alger considered it for a moment. "We can cooperate in selling this news, but the method of distributing profits must be changed. I want 70% of the profit because I will be taking a great risk." "All right then." Hobert looked reluctant, but this was already higher than his expected profit. He had originally only wanted to earn a commission. Audrey joined the conversation and asked, "Hanged man, aren't you going to use this news to seize that ship of valuables? That's an adventure at sea. Just thinking about it is exciting, but the premise is that those valuables are illegal income." Before Alger could say anything, Hobert smiled and said, "Adventure is not seeking death. As far as I know, there should be a Sequence 5 powerhouse escorting that ship, and he most likely possesses a Grade 2 sealed artifact." Audrey covered her mouth. "That's strong." "Yes, the valuables on the ship are gold and jewels plundered by the Intis Republic from its colonies. If you have the ability, you can plunder them at will. On the high seas, there is no such thing as illegal or legal." Hobert thought to himself that if Audrey were to be the captain, she would consider the legality of even stealing a loaf of bread, and probably everyone on the ship would starve to death. Alger asked, "What about the value of the valuables on the ship?" "At least 100,000 pounds of gold." Hobert said, "There are also many silver and many jewels. The specific value is at least 200,000 pounds or more." Alger was somewhat surprised. No wonder there's a Sequence 5 powerhouse escorting it. Then he added, "Generally speaking, the departure information of such a ship should be confidential." Hobert smiled. "Just like how I knew before that the Ruined Kingdom didn't plan to retaliate against the Forsake Empire, I just happened to have a channel to know this news." Alger asked again, "The specific route, when and from which port did it depart?" "They planned to take the western route, and departed from Caesar Port about 10 days ago. When Rosal opened up the new continent, he found 2 relatively safe routes in the Raging Sea. One was the western route passing through the Mid-Range Island, and the other was the eastern route passing through Tiana Island and the Rostad Archipelago. Additionally, there was a route passing through the Galgas Archipelago and the Sea of White Whales, which also reached the South Continent, but it required a detour through the Sonia Sea, making the journey longer. It was called the Sonia route and was basically the exclusive route of the northernmost Forsac Empire." Alger roughly estimated where the opponent's ship had reached. "At least this news needs to be sold to one of the 7 generals, oh, no, 6 generals. Ordinary pirates wouldn't go to their deaths." He paused and then said, "It's hard to say how much this news can be sold for right now, but I think this news can be sold for at least £2,000, and if the plunder process goes smoothly, the reward might even double or more." Hobert nodded. "You call the shots on the specific operation." He then said to Audrey, "If it's convenient, please give me the £400 owed, and Hanged Man's £1,400 owed." Hobert spread his hands. "You heard it too. I found a clue about a sealed artifact with travel ability. I need to raise funds as soon as possible." Audrey and Alger both agreed to settle the debts by sacrificing to the fool after the gathering ended. Derek quickly said, "Sorry, Emperor, I just passed the assessment and gained a way to earn merit points. I might only be able to pay you the previous reward at the next gathering." "It's all right, you don't need to be too anxious." Hobert smiled. "Congratulations, little son, congratulations on passing the assessment." "Thank you." Derek was very touched. Emperor was the third person to congratulate him. The first two were his instructor and a good friend. The instructor's congratulations were a bit perfunctory, and his friend's congratulations seemed a bit sour. Only Emperor's congratulations were truly sincere. After settling the debts, Hobert turned to the head of the long table and said, "The fool, I previously bribed you, and my potion was half digested. Please forgive my rashness, I hope to bribe you again." Alger had long wanted to ask if Emperor's bribe had been successful, but he was afraid that Mr. Fool would think he was questioning his authority, so he never dared to ask. Since it was successful, it means that Mr. Fool is truly a deity. Thinking of this, Alger shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Isn't this obvious?" Audrey smiled. "Congratulations, Mr. Emperor. I didn't expect there to be a channel for quickly digesting potions." "Yes, I didn't expect the effect to be so good either," Hobert said with a smile. Derek was also happy for Emperor. Emperor is really amazing, he knows so much. Klein deliberately made the world show a surprised expression to fit the persona of a new member. Then, in the image of the fool, he said, "Currently, I don't need any sacrifices. The sacrifices I need are not something you can access at your level." Hobert thought to himself, I'll sacrifice a main ingredient for a magician and see if you want it." While he thought this, he said with a smile, "Mr. Fool, please forgive my presumption, but I might be able to collect something that interests you in the near future. If that item can move you, I will then sacrifice it to you, completing the bribe process. If not, I will continue to search for things that might interest you." Klein nodded. "All right." To be honest, he didn't even know what he wanted. It was only because he was afraid that Emperor's sacrifice would be too low level, and that Mr. Fool would treat it as a treasure, that he said what he needed was not something Emperor could access. Since Emperor was so confident, he could first see what good things Emperor could collect, and then decide whether to let him sacrifice to him. It wouldn't be too late. Anyway, the final right of interpretation rested with the fool. Audrey smiled. "I'm really looking forward to it." They still remembered that when Emperor bribed Mr. Fool last time, they heard a lot of advanced extraordinary knowledge, which greatly broadened their horizons. Audrey was looking forward to Emperor's second bribe, as she, as an observer, could still gain a lot of new advanced Beyonder knowledge. At this moment, she recalled Emperor's very useful magical item. "Mr. Emperor, may I ask where you bought that spectator pathway magical item? You know, I've been looking for clues to the psychological alchemists." Hobert said, "That was given to me by my elder." Klein and Alger were both envious, and at the same time, they both thought, Emperor indeed comes from a Beyonder family. Klein also thought, and it's a Beyonder family with a certain foundation, otherwise such a high-quality item with such small negative effects wouldn't be so generously given to a junior. Audrey asked again, "May I also ask, does your elder still have spectator pathway magical items? You want to buy one?" Hobert smiled. "There's no need. Take psychological spoon, for example, you are already sequence 8. After your next advancement, you will gain the extraordinary ability of hypnosis. When you advance to sequence 6, you will have all the abilities of psychological spoon. If you find clues to the psychological alchemists, you should be able to advance to sequence 7 very quickly. At that time, your own extraordinary abilities will highly overlap with the abilities of psychological spoon. Therefore, an important principle for purchasing magical items is to gain abilities that you do not currently possess or will not possess in the future. Hearing Hobert's explanation, Audrey immediately understood the issue. I understand, thank you for the reminder. Hobert smiled. However, if you need it, you can certainly rent psychological spoon again. He said, the other members as well. In other Beander gatherings, there wouldn't be a business like magical item rental. But the Tarot Club is different. With Mr. Fool's witness, we won't worry about other members defaulting on their rent after borrowing our magical items. Everyone's eyes lit up. Emperor, indeed had a great business mind. However, Klein and Alger each smiled helplessly, as they didn't have any magical items that were particularly impressive. The gathering entered its final information exchange segment. After everyone spoke in turn, Klein concluded this Tarot Club. Raging Sea, on the Blue Avenger. Alger returned to the captain's cabin, first recalling the information Emperor mentioned that could be sold for a high price. Then he sacrificed the £1,400 cash given to Emperor to the Fool. Next, he pondered who to sell this information to. He could contact 3 sea generals. Of course, he wasn't in direct contact with these 3 powerhouses themselves, but he knew the people they had stationed in the Rosted Archipelago to collect intelligence. He temporarily had no intention of reporting it to the Storm Church. If he did, he would only accumulate a certain amount of merit, without gaining too many benefits. Because the Storm Church would only seize a ship escorted by another country's commodore if they were desperate, which could likely trigger a series of diplomatic incidents, making it not worth the effort for the higher-ups. Finally, he decided to sell this information to Hell General Ludwell. Firstly, Hell General had the ability to plunder a golden ship. Secondly, Hell General's liaison, Iser, knew that Alger had a Storm Church background. Of course, Iser didn't know that Alger was a member of the Storm Church, only believing him to be an peripheral member of the Storm Church. Alger had deliberately revealed this information to Iser when Alger was about to make a deal with Iser, to prevent Iser from double-crossing him. For the same reason, this transaction could also prevent Iser from double-crossing him. But even so, this transaction still carried huge risks. However, Alger also thought that even if this information could only sell for £2,000, it would greatly alleviate his current financial pressure. Alger, who was preparing for a secret advancement, had a common problem with other Wild Beyonders: no money. After hesitating for more than half a minute, Alger finally made up his mind: do it. Even if Iser wanted to default, I have the Sapphire Scepter, and it would be easy to escape from him. So Alger cleared the clutter from his table and replanned his route on the sea chart. God-forsaken land, Silver City. Derek returned to his room and spaced out for a while. I still owe Mr. Emperor a debt, and I haven't found the main ingredient for my Light Seeker, and now I've promised Mr. World to help him obtain the true roots and sap of the Mist Treant. My merits are simply not enough. No, I must think of other ways, Derek thought. I heard that helping out in the workshop to make daily necessities can also earn some merits. I can go and check it out there. Derek felt that he had to act immediately. He thought to himself, I didn't expect being in debt to make me so motivated. After drinking a few sips of water, Derek, who had planned to rest for the afternoon, straightened his clothes and went out again. Backland, 192 Blanca Street. Hobert received the total debt of £1,800 from Alger and Audrey through the method of obtaining a boon. Coupled with the prisoner extraordinary characteristic he had just dealt with yesterday, Hobert's total savings now approached £7,000. Hobert deposited another £2,000 into the bank, leaving him with nearly £200 in cash, plus income from the night watchers and the law firm, which was enough for his daily expenses. Then, according to his previous plan, Hobert went to visit Bishop Utravsky at the Harvest Church. On Rose Street, the Harvest Church remained as it was, with candles lit, and the tall and powerful bishop seated in the front row, though there were few believers. Upon entering the church, Hobert smiled and said, "Father, yesterday I suddenly remembered that I hadn't finished reading the Life Bible yet. And I just experienced something very terrifying, and I wanted to find a place to unburden my soul, so I thought of this place, and I came here. The Great Earth Mother will not refuse anyone who needs help," Bishop Utravsky said in a calm tone. "Come over." He pushed the Life Bible in front of him towards Hobert. Hobert sat beside Utravsky and lowered his head to read. Quiet returned to the church, and everything seemed very harmonious. Unconsciously, Hobert read for over an hour, and he felt the lingering fear in his spiritual body gradually disappearing. This made him think that the Bibles in Orthodox churches, seemingly describing stories about gods and saints, probably all have the effect of making one's spirit and spiritual body more peaceful. There must be some mystical operations involved, just like observations of the spirit world, where even chapters written in rune language can make people agitated and uneasy. Just as Hobert was about to discuss the contents of the Life Bible with Utravsky, the wall next to the two of them suddenly became illusory. Then, a handsome young man of about 27 or 28 years old emerged from the illusion. He had black hair and red eyes, with his hair combed back diagonally, appearing both serious and somewhat dashing. Hobert was stunned. Wasn't this the vampire Emlyn White? Then he almost laughed, never expecting to have the good fortune to witness Emlyn's capture. Emlyn was also a bit confused when he saw Utravsky and Hobert. Then he politely smiled and said, "Excuse me, gentlemen, I'm lost, so I came to the wrong place." Hobert, however, smiled and said, No, you didn't come to the wrong place. It must be the Earth Mother who brought you to us." Emlyn also recognized Hobert. "I remember you were before." Then he realized, what Earth Mother? Hobert pointed to the holy symbol of life in the church. Emlyn turned pale with fright upon seeing the holy symbol and immediately turned to leave. Utravsky stood up and blocked Emlyn. "Your coming here must be the guidance of the Earth Mother. Praise the Mother, believe in the Mother. Go to your grey." Emlyn originally wanted to say, "Go to your great Earth Mother," but seeing Utravsky's face instantly turned terrifying, he immediately changed his words. "Grey. Great big head." Hobert, standing by, watched the show with his arms crossed. What a sensible vampire. Emlyn moved swiftly, trying to bypass Utravsky and leave the church. But Utravsky had already swung his palm like an iron fan, hitting Emlyn's face with a fierce and accurate blow, directly knocking him to the ground. Emlyn sat on the ground in a daze for a full 2 seconds. Hobert believed he was completely dazed from the hit. Vampires have always been known for their agility and strong self-healing abilities. Emlyn, at his age, might have received such a fan-like slap for the first time. After the young vampire reacted, he immediately transformed into a swarm of bats emitting black mist, flying over Utravsky's head. Utravsky then radiated the light of dawn. Grabbing 2 bats, the black mist on the bats disappeared, and the bats' forms also turned into ankles. The giant bishop grabbed the ankles, swung them, and fiercely slammed the swarm of bats onto the ground. The moment they touched the ground, the bats transformed back into Emlyn. This time, Emlyn was slammed solidly onto the ground, and even if he wasn't knocked out, he was completely dazed by the fall. Utravsky pinched the back of Emlyn's neck, like carrying a chick, and took Emlyn to the church's backyard. Emlyn only reacted when he was about to leave the church, shouting to Hobert, "If you can save me, I will reward you handsomely." Hobert smiled and said, "Sorry, I can't beat this, father." Amidst Emlyn's unwilling shouts, he was locked in the dungeon. Utravsky returned and explained, "It is the duty of every bishop to convert these vampires." Hobert smiled and said, "I know." He stood up, preparing to leave. "Thank you, Life Bible, for relieving my spiritual burden. It's getting late, I must take my leave." Utravsky said, "It is the Great Mother who makes your heart peaceful, provided, of course, that you are willing to open your heart to the Earth Mother." Hobert smiled, picked up his cane, and then seemed to suddenly remember something. "Oh, By the way, a gentleman has arrived in Backland who can solve your troubles. I think the Earth Mother will surely guide him here. Of course, I will also play a small, insignificant role in this. He didn't plan to do anything, because even if he did nothing, K would eventually come on his own after a while. Praise the Mother, Utravsky said, and thank you for your help. You might be followed on your way back, but as long as you act normal enough, you won't arouse their suspicion. Hobert was startled. Who would follow me? The companions of those we killed before, Utravsky said. They've been watching the church recently, as if they've discovered something. Hobert recalled the person in charge of the Tamara family in Backland, whom he had seen on Nicro Street earlier. At that time, there was also a strange old man with him, and the long-haired fat man seemed very deferential to the old man. Hobert guessed that the old man might be someone sent by the Tamara family to investigate the complete annihilation of the previous team. Thank you for the reminder, Hobert said. Then he thought that the other party might have found some clues, but they certainly hadn't traced it back to him yet, so now he needed to act as if nothing had happened. If he could be promoted to Sequence 6 soon, he could even organize a counterattack. After leaving the church, Hobert spread his spirituality and did not detect anyone watching him. He got into a hired carriage and still didn't notice being watched. However, Hobert trusted Utravsky's judgment. The other party might be using some magical item or sealed artifact to conceal their malice. Inside the carriage, Hobert's thoughts wandered, wondering what kind of clues the other party would obtain. They probably conducted a thorough investigation through dreams or psychological means, compiling a list of all strangers who came to Rose Street on the afternoon the judge and his team had their accident. Then, by tracking and investigating these strangers, they would surely find clues. Hobert realized that he was just one of those strangers at the time, and he would be followed but wouldn't attract too much attention. All the way back to Blanca Street, Hobert didn't feel like he was being watched. He returned to his bedroom, prayed to himself, and then entered the country of disorder, using true sight to observe his surroundings. Sure enough, he found 3 or 4 young people on the street looking at the door of No. 192. One more chapter to go. After Hobert became a Sequence 7 Beander, the true sight of the country of disorder could extend more than 10 meters away. He had thought before that such a wide field of vision would be very useful for anti-surveillance. Hobert sat on the Iron Throne, memorizing the faces of those young people. To escape the spiritual vigilance of a Sequence 7 Beander, they must have used a magical item or some mystical method. Then he began to think about how to deal with the other party's surveillance. He estimated that the other party would continue to monitor him for several days, and since so many people had come, should he take the initiative to counterattack? After thinking for a moment, Hobert dismissed the idea. If the other party hadn't focused their main surveillance on him, he would have to invite people from all over to complete the counterattack. Hobert estimated that when distributing the spoils, his ranking for selecting spoils would be difficult to place high. The key was that he would be admitting it without being asked. If he wasn't in danger, it would be better to wait until he became a Sequence 6 Beander, then put on a mask and counterattack. This would divert the other party's attention and allow him to collect some spoils. Having made up his mind, Hobert prepared to pay attention to the situation outside tonight. If the other party didn't initiate any action, it meant they only considered him a normal surveillance target. If the other party initiated any action, there was no need to panic. He could use the Creator to repel them. With the Black Emperor card, Hobert had many more operations available in the country of disorder. Even if he couldn't cause much damage to the opponent, he could scare them away. After observing the surroundings, Hobert left the country of disorder and went to the first floor. At this time, Furs had returned and was cooking in the kitchen. Hobert rolled up his sleeves to help. Today, Furs was preparing a seafood soup and a stewed lamb. With the £10 for meal expenses, provided by the police chief who kicked the door earlier, Hobert and Furs's diet improved significantly. They almost always had meat and could eat seafood every day. Hobert helped cook the seafood and peel it, preparing it for Furs. Furs, meanwhile, was marinating the lamb. As she cut a piece of fresh lamb into small pieces, she said hesitantly, "Hobert, I need your help with something, but please don't tell Zio." Hobert nodded. "Tell me. I, through my apprenticeship in the back kitchen during this period, have felt the compatibility between the potion, spirit, and spiritual body, and I am already a magician. According to my previous assumption, I should no longer hear the ravings of the blood moon." Now Furs completely trusted Hobert and would no longer use "a friend of mine" to describe what was happening to her. She said, "But, what I didn't expect was that whenever a blood moon appeared, I could still hear those maddening ravings, and they've been getting worse recently. To be honest, I don't know if I can survive the next blood moon." Hobert considered it. He was now fully capable of temporarily helping Furs alleviate these symptoms using the country of disorder. But in that case, Furs might miss the opportunity to join the tarot club. Of course, he could also alleviate Furs's symptoms first, and then recommend Furs to Mr. Fool later. However, if he did that, it would feel like making unnecessary trouble. After a few seconds of consideration, Hobert decided to follow the original trajectory. "Do you still remember what I said before, that your experience actually contains an opportunity to change your destiny?" The main reason was that the country of disorder could not pull people like Source Castle. It could only alleviate Furs's symptoms, but it could not completely isolate Mr. Door's voice, like Source Castle. Furs thought back for a moment and nodded. "I didn't just say that casually, I know what the Abraham family's curse represents. Let me explain it more clearly to you." Hobert said, "The ravings you hear are from a high sequence meander of your pathway, a stronger meander than a high sequence meander. Some hidden existences, such as those interested in that powerful meander, would certainly be happy to study those ravings. In this process, you can also be saved and get an opportunity to improve yourself." Hobert smiled. "Frankly, I can help you alleviate your symptoms, but that might make you miss a huge opportunity." Furs stopped needing the lamb. "Hidden existences, in that case, I. Don't worry," Hobert comforted, "hidden existences are not entirely synonymous with evil gods. I also know of a hidden existence who likes to help beyonders who have lost control regain their sanity. But this doesn't mean you can easily trust all hidden existences. I'm just saying that some hidden existences don't represent evil gods. For example, those that have been verified, or those whose honorific names have been recited once without causing disaster or madness." Furs first thought of the honorific name of the Fool that she had seen in a book from Viscount Glaint. Zio had already recited it once and was still alive and well. Hobert said, "Sometimes, don't be afraid to be bold with whom you seek help from, but at the same time, you still need to maintain sufficient vigilance in this regard. Well, I will also closely monitor your situation during the blood moon. If you truly need help, I will act." With Hobert's assurance, Furs let out a long sigh of relief. She decided to look for the honorific name of the Fool again, to use when she really couldn't hold on anymore. Just as the two finished this topic, Zio came in from outside, beaming. "The masked man's mission is finally over. Tonight, I must have a big meal and a drink to celebrate." Furs glanced at her friend. "A big meal is fine, but no alcohol." Hobert was stunned. "Why?" "She once drank at a bar and ended up persuading all the alcoholics one by one to quit drinking, and those who didn't want to quit." Zio quickly interrupted her friend. "Ha ha ha, all right, then I won't drink." At night, Hobert got up to monitor outside twice. In the latter half of the night, all the young people monitoring outside left, and they only appeared one after another in the early morning, indicating that the Tamara family currently did not consider Hobert a primary target. South Continent, West Bayland, in the mountains of the middle reaches of Hodis River. Elliot's carriage traveled on a somewhat muddy mountain road. Some sections of the road were very steep, with the rushing Hodis River on one side and a steep mountain on the other. The road was narrow, only wide enough for one carriage to pass. Many times, Elliot's carriage had to make way for carriages loaded with copper ore in wider areas. The goods carried by these carriages were too heavy, and the brakes were not very effective, often resulting in rollovers. It was normal for 1 or 2 drivers to die each month. However, whenever the mine recruited drivers from outside, these West Bayland people would still eagerly try to get jobs in the copper mine, because there were not many ways to earn a salary in West Bayland. In the evening, Elliot finally arrived at the wooden houses built by the copper mine. This place had already been taken over by the Bach family, and Elliot, as the supervisor of the copper mine, actually arrived a bit late. Moreover, there was a sequence 6 Beander among the people who arrived earlier, and everyone had long been quite critical of Grandpa Elliot. The reason for the extra update can be found in author's note. The reason for the extra update is that the average subscription for this book has exceeded 500, and the author can now receive a minimum guarantee. Some people might say, the author is too unaccomplished, it's only over 500, what's there to celebrate? This achievement depends on who it is. If this were the achievement of a certain platinum level great god, it would be better for him to die. But for an author like me, reaching an average subscription of over 500 in about 40 days after starting the book is already very good. Originally, the author thought it would take until June to achieve this result. After all, when it was first put on shelves, the average subscription was less than 200, and now it has grown by more than 300, which is quite fast. Nothing else, just one more chapter. Thank you for your subscription and support. O***********. There will be additional updates when the average subscription reaches 800 and 1000. Also, as of now, there are only about 40 monthly votes left until another chapter can be added. The author will prepare the extra chapters by the day after tomorrow at the latest. If you have monthly votes, please cast them for the author, it really will lead to more updates. Although the several Beyonders sent by the Bach family had some opinions about Elliot's tardiness, they were outwardly very welcoming to him. After the welcome banquet that evening, the next morning, the family members who had arrived early took Elliot to visit the copper mine. The Fursak Empire's colonists had been mining this copper mine for 7 or 8 years, and the living facilities were already quite complete. There were places for managers like Elliot to live, places for local foremen and coachmen, and shacks for slaves and horses. While touring, the group chatted, and Elliot noticed that these family members had subtly gathered around Zachary, the Sequence 6, showing only enthusiasm but not much respect for Elliot, the actual leader. Elliot, of course, knew that he had gotten this position because he was a loyal believer of the Creator. In the family's other copper mine in a timber yard, a Sequence 6 managed them. Elliot was merely a Sequence 7, and so far, he had not made significant contributions to the family. I need to find an opportunity to regain power, Elliot thought. After visiting the living quarters and carriages, the group arrived at the entrance of the copper mine. Elliot saw an old-looking steam engine at the mine entrance, seemingly working with effort, turning its wheels with a zzz sound with every movement. On the other side of the steam engine, hundreds of slaves squatted, while brown-skinned local foremen patrolled with whips, maintaining the order of the slaves. When the foreman saw Elliot and the others, they immediately showed fawning smiles. Elliot asked, "Are these slaves waiting for a shift change?" "No," Zachary replied, "there was a small-scale water seepage in the mine shaft yesterday. Before the pump drains the water from the mine, there's no point in them going down." Another Beander following behind said, "This pump was left by the Fursak people. It's said that when it was transported here, it was already an old guy that had been used for over 20 years. The piston often leaks, and it will probably take another day and night to pump." Another Beander said to Elliot, "Mine manager, can you apply to the Elder Council for a new pump?" The others also chimed in, "Exactly. If it were a new pump, those dozen or so slaves probably wouldn't have drowned yesterday. Now slaves are getting more and more expensive, and these are all costs for the copper mine. It would be best to buy a ruin-made pump. I heard in Crowley City that ruin-made pumps are the best quality. I've also heard that if we had a ruin pump, the copper mine's output would at least double." Elliot nodded, "I'll see what I can do." He knew very well that they were trying to make things difficult for him. Zachary then smoothed things over, give up on that idea. I've also heard about ruin-made pumps, but they are in high demand even in their colonies. You can't buy them anywhere else on the South Continent. Even if you want to buy one, you have to go through the Fursak Empire, and who knows how much of a premium you'd have to pay. Everyone chuckled, looking at Elliot. Elliot said nothing, just watched the steam engine operating, as if using it to avoid the awkwardness. Hobert's team was far busier than initially expected. On average, they had to hold court twice a day, and the four of them simply couldn't handle it all. So Hobert asked Barton for 2 more people in an office. Tuesday was another busy day. He was supposed to deliver a letter to Mr. Azek this afternoon, but due to the arrival of new people and the need to redefine work scopes, Hobert couldn't leave and had to wait until tomorrow. Just before getting off work, Hobert heard a prayer from the country of disorder. Without thinking, it had to be Elliot. Other people who knew the honorable name of the Creator generally wouldn't pray to the Creator. Arriving at the washroom, Hobert entered the country of disorder. Sure enough, it was Elliot praying. Extending his spirituality to the star representing Elliot, he immediately heard Elliot's voice. Great Creator, I make my daily report to you. I have been assigned by the Elder Council to manage a copper mine. After briefly explaining the situation of the copper mine, he finally said, there is a small matter for which I need your help. The facilities here are really too dilapidated, especially that pump, which is terribly old. I wonder if any of your favored ones have relevant channels to buy a pump produced by the Ruined Kingdom. In Elliot's understanding, a great figure like the Creator would naturally have many favored ones. Hobert, sitting on the Iron Throne, had an urge to cover his face. Friend, my favored one is you. Hobert also thought that he did indeed have a channel for pumps. Didn't Mr. Dickos make the most advanced pumps in this world? However, the Creator certainly couldn't be interested in such trivial matters. He didn't immediately reply to Elliot. Instead, after work, he returned to his rented room on Blanca Street and prayed to himself. Respected Creator, I have a channel to purchase ruin pumps, and they are the most advanced centrifugal pumps. The price for one is around £1,200, roughly worth 320 ounces of gold. 320 ounces is about 9 kilograms. Then Hobert entered the country of disorder, mosaicked his prayer scene, and threw it into Elliot's star. This was a use of a small account, and Mr. the Fool said it was good. Elliot was having dinner when suddenly, the Creator on the Iron Throne appeared in his mind. The Creator was more majestic and oppressive than before, exactly matching the description of the Black Emperor in the family records. While being oppressed to the point of breathlessness, Elliot was also somewhat excited. The great Creator had become even stronger. Then he saw a man whose appearance and figure were unclear, praying, Great Creator, I have. After the scene ended, the vision in Elliot's mind disappeared, and he saw the dining table in front of him again, as well as the other family members. Elliot's first thought was, the Creator indeed has other favored ones. 320 ounces of gold was not expensive for Elliot because copper mines usually also contained gold ore. It would be difficult for them to get 1,200 pounds of ruined currency, perhaps even 1,000 ounces of gold might not be able to exchange for 1,200 pounds of banknotes. But gold for them was simply inventory piled up in the warehouse. Elliot looked at the people at the dining table and smiled. I'll let you see how powerful the great Creator is. Such a large transaction would certainly need to be reported upwards. When Elliot left No Existence Town, he had been summoned by the Patriarch, and the way to report upwards was to pray to the Patriarch. After night fell and silence descended, Elliot prepared a simple altar in his private room, then chanted the honorific name, Teacher of Authority and Chaos. Protector of the Bach family. Ruler of the Hodes Basin. Incarnation of Distortion. Great Lawrence Bach. Elliot burned the relevant mystical herbs, establishing a channel to the object of his prayer. The candle flame suddenly grew large, and Elliot saw a towering figure in the firelight. He humbly bowed and said, Respected Patriarch, I have reached the Hodes copper mine. Although it is operating normally, the equipment used is very old. May I use the channel of the Great, the Creator's ear to purchase a new model of ruin-made water pump? The towering figure in the candlelight seemed to be thinking. A few seconds later, Patriarch Lawrence said, "Buy two. Tomorrow, you will build an altar and use extraordinary materials to establish a channel with me. I will bestow upon you a sealed artifact, and you can use this opportunity to complete the second round of bribe." Elliot bowed again. "Thank you for your care." On Wednesday afternoon, Hobert finally had time to visit Mr. Dicko's on Nicro Street. This time, Mr. Dicko's took Hobert to see the crane. Hobert had not expected that the tall cranes on the dock existed in this era. Although they were not as flexible as Hobert remembered, they could still lift about 10 tons of goods at a time, greatly saving manpower and improving efficiency. As Hobert was about to leave, he finally stated his purpose. "I have a friend who wants to buy 2 new water pumps. I just thought of a steam magnate I know, so I came to consult for my friend." Dicko's smiled and said, "It's good that you're introducing business to me, but the other party must have a registered company in the Ruined Kingdom." "Don't worry, I can give him the general distributor price." "Okay, I'll tell him." Hobert asked again, "Will it be troublesome to transport them to other countries?" "Of course, it will be very troublesome. It costs a lot to bribe customs for clearance, and the tax rate is very high." Dicko's asked, "Is your friend a foreign merchant?" "No, I was just curious, so I asked." Hobert smiled. "What model of water pump does he need?" "The one we saw that day, the one about the size of a locomotive, that can be used in a mine." Dicko's nodded. "SL 550. There are still parts in the warehouse, and production can start immediately after an order is placed." Hobert said, "Okay, I'll tell my friend." In the returning hansom cab, Hobert felt a bit troubled. It would be very difficult to transport it abroad, and even harder to transport it to the South Continent. It seems he will have to rely on the Creator Express for transportation. Hobert chuckled to himself. The Tarot Club members only knew how useful the Fool Express was, but they didn't know that the Creator Express also existed in this world. Hobert's only worry was that the gap in his sacrificial door was too small to grab a water pump the size of a locomotive. A large water pump would weigh at least several tons, and whether the Creator could grab such a heavy object that did not contain extraordinary materials was still an unknown. Hobert decided to conduct an experiment first, find a heavy object to try and grab. If it didn't work, he would think of other methods. However, he had to find a way to drive away the people from the Tamara family who were tailing him. Otherwise, if they saw the image of the Creator, it would be a big problem. Soon, Hobert had an idea. Tomorrow, he could go to Lever Church to seek help from Mechanical Heart, to make the Tamara family dare not track him recently. The reason he sought help from Mechanical Heart, instead of the more familiar Night Watchers, was because Night Watchers were indeed involved in the previous actions against the Tamara family. If Hobert had contact with Night Watchers, he could also scare the other party away, but it would most likely make the other party pay more attention to him. However, what Hobert had not expected was that plans change. That night, Hobert entered Country of Disorder for his routine observation of the tailing situation outside, only to find that the 4 people tailing outside were actually fighting. However, it was clear that they all had scruples and didn't fight fiercely. It was more like they were probing each other. Could it be that someone bought dinner that didn't suit everyone's taste, so they started fighting? Hobert smiled and shook his head, then suddenly realized that he might have made a preconceived error. The 4 people outside were not a single group. The more he thought about it, the more he felt this was the case. Last night, he had thought that if the Tamara family sent 4 people to monitor him, it should be a prelude to some action against him. Otherwise, they wouldn't send 4 people just to tail him. If these 4 people were 2 groups, or even 3 groups, it would make sense. They were all on routine tailing duty. As for who sent the other people tailing him, Hobert also had some guesses. People sent by the Fenaport ambassador or Arnold. When he accidentally killed that Fenaport spy before, Hobert had guessed that Fenaport might send people to tail him, which was why he let Zio and Furs continue to live on Blanca Street for a while. Recently, Hobert and the other two had been paying attention to the situation on the street and had not noticed anyone tailing them. Now that he thought about it, the other party must have also used some method to deceive their spirituality, which was why they hadn't noticed anyone tailing them. Then Hobert realized that this was an opportunity to get rid of all eyes. He quickly returned to Country of Disorder, first opening the window to look. They were all hiding in the dark, and they didn't make too much noise during the fight, so he couldn't see or hear their fight from upstairs at all. Hobert leapt down from upstairs and quickly walked towards the alley opposite, following the positions he had seen in true sight. The four people who were probing each other in the alley all noticed this change. They tacitly split into pairs, leaning against different walls, ready to leave at any moment. Hobert said, "I don't know where you Beyonders came from, but you are so stupid that it's unbearable to watch. This is Backland. If you have any conflicts, go to the suburbs to resolve them. Don't cause trouble for others." All four people were stunned. "Now scram," Hobert said. "I'm telling you, I know Captain Eakins of Mechanical Heart, so be careful, or I'll report you." The four people seemed to have agreed beforehand, freezing there for a full 1 or 2 seconds before quickly walking out of the alley and leaving in 2 different directions. Hobert pursed his lips and smiled, thinking, "One thing I said just now was right, these four people are indeed very stupid." Among the four who left, 2 of them, after repeatedly confirming they were not being followed, entered a private house on Rose Street. In the living room of the private house, a middle-aged man around 30 asked, "Why did you two come back so early today?" "Something unexpected happened," one of the young tailing men said, "but I think we can basically rule out that lawyer's suspicion." For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.